What's up guys, welcome back. This is Anime Crossover. You'll be watching What If Naruto Was Mugetsu Part 2. Now, let's begin. The glass exploded inward, like a fragmentation grenade, rather than simply breaking. Ichigo Kurosaki shattered the apartment's second-story window with his spiritual force, causing the wooden frame to splinter into hundreds of jagged pieces. His unsealed Shinigami power acted as a physical shockwave, blowing the floral curtains completely off their rods and scattering. Orihime's meticulously organized school notes flowed through the air like confetti. He landed heavily in the center of the living room, the woven straw of the tatami mats crunching beneath his sandals. He dropped to one knee to absorb the impact, his right hand gripping the cloth-wrapped hilt of the colossal Zanpakuto, the massive blade resting flat against his shoulder. The air in the apartment was immediately suffocating. The scent of warm miso soup and sweet-baked bread was entirely annihilated by the nauseating, heavy stench of stagnant water, rotting copper, and a foul, acidic burn that stung the back of Ichigo's throat. The spiritual pressure in the room wasn't just heavy, it was suffocatingly possessive, dripping with a cold, desperate jealousy that made Ichigo's skin crawl. He slowly raised his head, his brown eyes locking onto the nightmare occupying the small living space. It was a hollow, but its form was uniquely twisted. It didn't possess legs. Its lower half was a long, thick, grayish-purple serpentine tail that coiled over the overturned coffee table and crushed the small television against the wall. Its torso was heavily muscled, leading up to a hunched back and a pair of long, multi-jointed arms ending in razor-sharp claws. The bone-white mask was horrifying. It lacked the animalistic characteristics of the centipede and skullcrusher. Instead, it was elongated and smooth, with a gaping, jagged maw that constantly dripped a thick, yellowish fluid. Where the eyes should have been, there were only deep, hollow black pits. But the monster was not looking at Ichigo. Tatsuki Arisawa lay unconscious in the grip of its massive claws. Tatsuki's school uniform was torn, and a terrifyingly large bruise was already blooming across the side of her face. She was completely unresponsive, her head lolling backward as the hollow lifted her effortlessly off the floor, preparing to snap her spine. Tatsuki-chan. The scream was raw and heartbreaking, piercing the heavy air. Orihime Inoue was backed up against the far wall of the kitchen alcove. Her bright orange hair was a mess, and her gray eyes were wide with terror, shattering her usual spacey, cheerful demeanor. She was not looking at Ichigo. As a living human without fully awakened spiritual awareness, she couldn't see the Shinigami or the monstrous hollow. But she could see the destruction. She could see Tatsuki hovering in the air, held by an invisible, terrifying force. And worst of all, she could feel the crushing, agonizing sorrow radiating from the invisible monster. A sorrow that felt impossibly, terrifyingly familiar. "Put her down," Ichigo commanded, his voice deadly low, vibrating with a cold fury that rattled the teacups in the kitchen cabinets. The serpentine hollow slowly turned its masked head toward him. The hollow black pits of its eyes seemed to narrow. It let out a low, gurgling hiss, the yellowish acid dripping from its maw and burning deep, smoking holes into the tatami mats. "Shin. I. Gami." The hollow grated, its voice sounding like two wet stones grinding together. It was a jagged, horrific imitation of human speech. "Get out. She is mine." "I won't ask twice," Ichigo said, gripping his massive cleaver with both hands and slowly standing up. The blade was so long that the tip scraped against the low ceiling of the apartment, carving a shallow groove into the plaster. The hollow let out a screech of pure, jealous rage. It didn't attack Ichigo. Instead, it violently hurled Tatsuki's unconscious body across the room, aiming directly for the heavy wooden dining table. Ichigo didn't think. The roaring furnace of pale blue reishi in his veins flared to life. He vanished from the center of the room in a blur of black shiakusho, crossing the distance in a fraction of a microsecond. He appeared right in front of the dining table, dropping his massive sword with a heavy thud to free his hands. He caught Tatsuki in midair, wrapping his arms around her and absorbing the kinetic impact with his own spiritual body. The force pushed him backward, his sandals skidding across the floorboards until his back slammed solidly against the wall, but he kept her head from striking the wood. He gently lowered Tatsuki to the floor, checking her breathing. It was shallow, but steady. She was alive, just deeply concussed by the hollow's physical force. "Ichi. Go?" Ichigo froze. He turned his head slowly. Orihime was staring at him. Not at the empty space where a ghost should be, but directly at him. Her gray eyes were wide, tracing the lines of his black kimono and the impossibly large sword resting on the floor beside him. The sheer, overwhelming density of his spiritual pressure, combined with the life or death trauma of the moment, had violently forced her latent spiritual awareness to awaken. She could see him, and, by extension, she could now see the monster. Orihime's breath caught in a sharp, horrified gasp as her eyes moved past Ichigo and locked onto the massive, serpentine hollow coiled in the center of her living room. "No," Orihime whispered, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She didn't scream. Her reaction was far more tragic. Tears instantly welled in her eyes, spilling over her cheeks as she stared at the bone-white mask. "Sora. Is that you?" Deep beneath the waking world, the pale blue ocean of the inner mindscape turned bitterly cold. Naruto Uzumaki hung against his rusted chains, his head bowed. The pitch-black reishi bandages covering his eyes were soaked with the dark, inky blood of his own strained existence, but the physical pain was entirely secondary to the crushing wave of emotion cascading down from the physical world. He felt the hollow's spiritual signature. It was a jagged, twisted knot of absolute loneliness and desperate, suffocating love. "It's him," Naruto realized, his internal voice heavy with an ancient, profound sadness. The brother, he didn't move on. Through Ichigo's senses, Naruto watched the tragic scene unfold. He saw the serpentine monster, driven mad by the isolation of the spiritual plane. He saw the high school girl, staring at the monster with a horrifying mixture of terror and absolute recognition. Naruto's glowing blue eyes dimmed beneath his bandages. He remembered the curse of hatred from his past life. He remembered how love, when severed by death and left to fester in the dark, could curdle into the most terrifying poison. He remembered watching Sasuke consumed by the grief of losing his family, turning his love for Itachi into a weapon that nearly destroyed the world. Souls were fragile things, whether they were made of chakra or reishi. When they broke, the sharp edges always cut those standing closest to them. He stayed behind because he wanted to protect her, Naruto mused, the heavy waters around him slowing to a mournful crawl. He anchored his soul to this apartment, watching her grow up, watching her make friends. And the longer he watched, the colder he got. He lost his heart, and that love turned into jealousy. He doesn't want to protect her anymore. He just wants her to be as lonely as he is. Naruto strained against the chains, projecting his consciousness upward. He couldn't fight the monster, but he could fight the despair threatening to paralyze Ichigo. "Breathe, kid," Naruto commanded, his voice a warm, steady rumble vibrating directly into the core of Ichigo's soul. "It's a tragedy. It's the worst kind of tragedy. But you can't save the brother anymore. He's already gone. If you hesitate now, he's going to drag her down into the dark with him. Hold the line." In the living room, the hollow, Sora Inoue, reared up, its long, segmented body scraping against the ceiling. "Ori. Heim." The monster hissed, the voice distorted and bubbling with acid, yet carrying an undeniable, warped echo of the gentle older brother who had raised her. "Sora." Orihime cried out, taking a step away from the kitchen counter, completely ignoring the terrifying claws and the dripping acid. She reached her hand out toward the beast. "What happened to you? Why are you doing this? Tatsuki-chan is my friend." "Friend?" Sora's hollow form violently thrashed, its massive tail sweeping across the room and completely destroying a bookshelf, sending novels and framed photographs crashing to the floor. "You stopped praying. You forgot me. You smile for her, not me." The sheer, petulant jealousy in the monster's voice was sickening. It was the logic of a starving child, twisted by the corruption of a hollow's endless void. "I didn't forget you," Orihime sobbed, dropping to her knees amid the shattered glass and ruined books. "I think of you every day. But you told me, be happy. You told me to live." "Liar." The hollow roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of the apartment building. The monster lunged, ignoring Ichigo entirely, its massive claws reaching directly for Orihime. Ichigo didn't hesitate. Naruto's quiet, anchoring presence in his chest kept his mind clear, overriding the horrifying emotional weight of the situation. He grabbed the hilt of his Zanpakuto from the floor and swung it upward in a brutal, one-handed arc. Clang! The colossal steel blade intercepted Sora's descending claws just inches above Orihime's head. The impact sent a shower of bright orange sparks raining down onto the tatami mats. Ichigo stood directly over Orihime, his back completely shielding her from her brother. He gritted his teeth, his muscles burning as he held the block against the hollow's massive downward pressure. The floorboards beneath Ichigo's sandals groaned and cracked under the combined weight of their spiritual energies. "Get away from her," Ichigo growled, pushing the blade upward and forcing the hollow back. "Shinigami!" Sora shrieked, the yellow acid bubbling furiously around its maw. "She is my sister, my soul. I will take her with me." "She's not yours to take," Ichigo spat back, his brown eyes blazing with a cold, pale blue light. He twisted his wrists, dropping the blade slightly, and then drove his left shoulder directly into the flat of the sword, pushing forward like a battering ram. The physical force threw the hollow off balance, its serpentine body tumbling backward and crashing into the far wall of the living room, leaving a massive, spider web indentation in the plaster. Ichigo couldn't swing his Zanpakuto properly. The blade was simply too large for the enclosed space. If he tried to perform a full horizontal or vertical slash, he would bring the roof down on top of Tatsuki and Orihime. He was severely handicapped, forced to use the giant weapon as a glorified shield and battering ram. Sora recovered instantly, its dozens of small, black eyes locking onto Ichigo with pure hatred. It opened its gaping maw and unleashed a high-pressure stream of yellowish acid directly at the Shinigami. "Watch out!" Orihime screamed. Ichigo slammed the flat of his blade into the floorboards, kneeling behind the massive slab of steel like a barricade. The acid splashed violently against the other side of the Zanpakuto. It hissed and smoked, attempting to eat through the dense reishi of the blade, but the sheer, overwhelming power Ichigo possessed kept the steel intact. However, the acid that missed the sword splashed onto the walls and floor, instantly melting through the plaster and wood, filling the room with toxic, choking smoke. "Ichigo!" Rukia bounded through the shattered window and landed gracefully on the ruined tatami mats. She took one look at the confined space, the melting walls, and the massive Zanpakuto pinned defensively to the floor. "You cannot fight it here," Rukia yelled, coughing as the acidic smoke burned her lungs. "Your blade is too large. You will destroy the structure of the building. You must draw it outside." "I'm not leaving them in here with that thing," Ichigo yelled back over his shoulder, holding the heavy sword steady as Sora unleashed another volley of acid. "I'll protect the humans," Rukia stated, her voice carrying absolute authority. Even without her powers, her centuries of battlefield experience shone through. She dropped to a low stance, pulling a series of small, strange talismans from her pocket. "Break its guard and force it through the wall." Ichigo didn't need to be told twice. The heat from the acid on the other side of his blade was beginning to singe his black robes. He waited for a lull in the acidic barrage. The moment the hollow paused to draw breath, Ichigo exploded upward. He didn't swing the sword. He gripped the hilt with both hands, lowered his shoulder, and charged straight at the massive monster like a linebacker. He used the flat of the colossal Zanpakuto as a plow, driving all of his terrifying, unrefined spiritual pressure into a single, forward rush. He slammed into the hollow's chest. Sora let out a breathless, gurgling gasp as the sheer kinetic force lifted its massive, serpentine body completely off the floor. Ichigo didn't stop. He drove his legs like pistons, pushing the monster backward across the ruined living room. They crashed through the plaster walls separating the living room from the bedroom, shattering the wooden studs like toothpicks. Ichigo kept pushing, driving the beast completely through the apartment and straight toward the exterior wall of the building. Ichigo and the hollow crashed through the second-story wall, tumbling out into the dark night air. They fell together, crashing heavily onto the paved asphalt of the empty alleyway beside the apartment building, scattering bricks, dust, and broken glass in a wide radius. Ichigo quickly rolled and regained his footing. He finally had room. The alleyway was narrow, but it provided an open sky. He tightly gripped his Zanpakuto. The pale blue reishi flared around the blade like a localized storm. Sora thrashed in the rubble, its serpentine tail slapping against the brick walls of nearby buildings. The hollow slowly raised its bone-white mask, the black pits of its eyes fixed on Ichigo. The monster hissed, "You! Separate!" As yellow acid dripped and sizzled on the asphalt. "I'll eat you first, then her." "You are not touching her," Ichigo said, his voice cold and firm. He raised the massive cleaver and pointed it directly at the hollow's mask. The heavy, silent void in his chest hummed, perfectly anchoring the explosive force in his veins. Ichigo said quietly, "I know who you were." The words carried through the night wind. "I know you loved her. But whatever you are now, you are a nightmare. And I am going to wake her up." The hollow charged forward with terrifying speed and massive claws, ready to rip the Shinigami apart. Ichigo planted his feet, gripping the hilt of his blade and preparing to end the tragedy. Ichigo's Zanpakuto couldn't fit through the narrow alleyway. Sora Inoue's massive body and razor-sharp claws threatened to tear apart the Shinigami, forcing Ichigo to take a step back. He swung the colossal cleaver in a panicked diagonal arc, but the tip of the blade struck the brick wall of the adjacent apartment building. Crack! The steel sheared through the brick and mortar like a hot knife through butter, sending a shower of red clay dust and sparks into the dark air. However, friction reduced the swing's lethal momentum. Sora collided into him. The physical impact was devastating. Ichigo felt the breath rush out of his lungs as the hollow's heavy, muscled torso slammed into his chest. The two of them tangled and skidded across the rough asphalt. Sora's segmented tail whipped around, completely shattering a metal dumpster and launching garbage bags into the night. "Die!" Sora screamed, his breath lashing against Ichigo's face in a foul, acidic wave. The monster raised one multi-jointed arm, lowering a jagged claw toward Ichigo's throat. Ichigo let go of his sword with his left hand and raised his forearm to block the attack. The hollow's claw dug into the sleeve of his black shiakusho, tearing the material and biting into his spiritual flesh. A sharp, burning pain ran down Ichigo's arm, but he gritted his teeth and refused to let the monster get any closer. "You replaced me," Sora hissed, his bone-white mask just inches from Ichigo's face. The hollow black pits where his eyes should have been appeared to bore straight into Ichigo's soul. "She bought hairpins and wore them instead of praying to me. She was forgetful. She was alive." Ichigo roared back, his right hand gripping the hilt of his Zanpakuto, attempting to find leverage to pull the massive blade free from where it dragged on the ground. "She is a high school girl. Did you want her to sit in a dark room crying for the rest of her life?" "Yes." The hollow screamed, a sound so devoid of logic and filled with twisted, possessive agony that Ichigo became physically ill. "If she's not mine, she belongs in the dark." Sora opened his mouth, the yellowish acid bubbling violently at the back of his throat, ready to melt Ichigo's face off at point-blank range. Naruto Uzumaki narrowed his glowing blue eyes in the inner world's flooded city. The mindscape's turbulent waters mirrored the chaos of the physical world. Naruto could feel the burning pain in Ichigo's left arm, but more importantly, he could feel Sora's despair weighing down on Ichigo's resolve. Naruto thought, "He's drowning in his own grief, and he's trying to pull you down with him." His voice was low and steady in the dark trench. Naruto struggled against the rusted chains created by the Soul King. He was the Void, a crippled god of nothingness, but he had spent an entire lifetime learning how to unravel the knotted, hateful threads of the human heart. He recognized this particular brand of darkness. It was the curse of hatred. It was the same poison that had transformed his best friend into a terrorist, and the same venom that had fueled the Akatsuki. When love had no place to go, it curdled, it turned into a cage. Naruto projected his thoughts upward, sending a warm, golden pulse of absolute clarity through the heavy, pale blue Shinigami water. Ichigo couldn't reason with him. His heart is gone. The only thing left inside that mask is the echo of his pain. You can't talk him down. Naruto concentrated on the microscopic singularity of his own anti-energy, deep within his chest. He could not fight for Ichigo, but he could serve as the ultimate filter. Naruto remarked, "You're swinging that sword like a baseball bat, with a fierce, protective warmth blooming beneath your pitch-black bandages. You are holding back because you know it is her brother. You are afraid of hurting his memory. But you're not fighting your brother anymore. You're fighting the cage that holds his soul." Naruto unleashed a fraction of his terrifying conceptual power. He pushed the essence of the immutable present upward, not to remove the hollow, but to eliminate Ichigo's hesitation. He filled Ichigo's spiritual veins with absolute, diamond-hard clarity. Do not hesitate. Shatter the mask. Break the cage. As the yellowish acid crested in the hollow's throat, Ichigo experienced an unexpected mental shift. The chaotic panic, fear of making a mistake, and emotional weight of fighting his classmate's brother vanished into a heavy, silent void in the center of his chest. He experienced a terrifying clarity of mind. Ichigo did not attempt to push the massive hollow off him. Instead, he directed a large amount of pale blue reishi into his legs. He violently planted both feet flat on the asphalt and pushed backward, sliding out from beneath the monster just as a stream of boiling acid erupted from its mouth. The acid splashed against the pavement where Ichigo's head had been a fraction of a second prior, leaving a deep, smoking crater. Ichigo used the momentum of his slide to free his Zanpakuto. He rolled to his feet, ignoring the bloodied slash on his left arm. The massive cleaver no longer weighed him down. In this moment of complete clarity, the sword felt like an extension of his own burning desire to protect. Sora whipped his serpentine body around, letting out a frustrated screech. He coiled his lower half like a spring and charged at the Shinigami again, claws fully extended, ready to impale Ichigo against the brick wall. Ichigo stated calmly, "I'm not going to let you hurt her." His voice was free of anger and panic. It was the voice of an executioner, delivering a tragic but necessary sentence. Ichigo did not dodge. He stepped straight into the hollow's charge. He held the cloth-wrapped hilt with both hands, lowering his center of gravity. He twisted his torso, pulled the massive blade back, and swung it forward in a perfect horizontal arc. He did not aim for the claws. He did not aim for the serpentine tail. He aimed directly at the cage. The hollow's bone-white mask came into contact with the massive steel blade. The impact was deafening, with a sharp crack that echoed down the alleyway and rattled the windows of the surrounding buildings. For a microsecond, the dense, corrupted reishi of the hollow attempted to repel the blade. But Ichigo's power was undeniable, fueled by his desperate determination and anchored by the silent god within. The blade cut cleanly through the center of the elongated, eyeless mask. Time appeared to slow down. Ichigo continued swinging, the momentum propelling the heavy sword all the way around his body until it collided with the asphalt, spraying sparks everywhere. Sora's massive body froze in midair. A spiderweb of deep, jagged fissures spread outward from the mosque's center. The glowing, yellowish acid that dripped from the maw evaporated instantly. A blinding, pure white light began to bleed through the cracks in the bone, forcing Ichigo to cover his eyes with his forearm. The mask shattered into thousands of pieces of dissolving white ash. The hollow's monstrous, serpentine body lost its cohesion. The grayish-purple carapace, razor-sharp claws, and multi-jointed arms crumbled away like dry sand in the wind. The suffocating odor of stagnant water and rotting copper vanished, replaced by the crisp, cool scent of the night air. The monster disappeared once the blinding light faded. A young man fell to his knees on ruined asphalt. He wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans. His brown hair was slightly tangled, and his face was soft, kind, and overwhelmingly human. A heavy metal chain extended from the center of his chest and was severed at the fourth link. It was Sora Inoue. The real Sora. He knelt on the ground and looked at his hands with trembling eyes. The hollow's madness, jealousy, and insatiable hunger were gone. The Zanpakuto's purification removed corruption and revealed the fragile soul. What did I do? Sora whispered, his voice shaking violently. He examined the ruined alleyway, noting the melted asphalt, the shattered dumpster, and the massive hole he had blasted through his own sister's apartment wall. He remembered everything. He recalled staying in the apartment following his funeral. He remembered seeing Orihime cry herself to sleep. He remembered the slow, agonizing descent into madness as his chain wore away. And he remembered the horrific, blinding jealousy that had driven him to attack Tatsuki, and attempt to kill his own sister. Tears streamed down Sora's cheeks and dripped onto the asphalt. Orihime. Sora choked out, wrapping his arms around his own chest and sobbing, his shoulders shaking from the crushing weight of his guilt. Oh God, Orihime. I'm so sorry. I am a monster. I became a monster. Ichigo walked slowly, the massive Zanpakuto resting heavily on his shoulder. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion, but he didn't let down his guard completely. He paused a few feet away from the weeping soul. "You have lost your heart," Ichigo said quietly. "That's what happens to spirits who linger too long. You did not want to hurt her, Sora. You simply forgot how to love her." Sora looked up, his tear-streaked face illuminated by the dim orange light of the distant street lamp. He recognized Ichigo's orange hair and fierce, determined scowl, even though he was dressed in black Shinigami robes. You're Kurosaki," Sora exclaimed, his voice full of emotion. "You are in her class. She mentions you occasionally. She claims you always appear angry, but you once helped her pick up her books after she dropped them." Ichigo blinked, surprised by the mundane memory amidst the spiritual wreckage. "Yeah, I suppose I did." Sora lowered his head and pressed his palms on the rough asphalt. "I could not leave her. Our parents were awful. I took her away when she was younger. I raised her. I promised to always protect her. When I died in that accident, I could not bear the thought of her being alone. So I stayed." He squeezed his eyes shut, causing tears to flow faster. "But I saw her grow up. I watched as she made friends. I watched her buy the hairpins. And instead of being happy for her, I felt cold. I felt like she was leaving me behind. I'm very sorry. I nearly took everything from her." Ichigo's jaw tightened. The heavy void in his chest throbbed with deep empathy. He thought of Yuzu and Karen. Would he have been able to let go if he had died and had to watch them go on without him? Or would his desire to protect them have devolved into the same dark, possessive cage? "Sora." The voice sounded small, breathless, and desperate. Ichigo turned his head. Orihime stood in the jagged, ruined opening of the second-floor brick wall. She had climbed through the wreckage of her living room and was looking down the alleyway. Her hands gripped the broken brickwork so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her spiritual awareness was violently awakened, allowing her to clearly see into the alley. She noticed Ichigo in his black robes. And she saw her brother kneeling on the ground, looking exactly like he did the day he died. "Orihime!" Sora exclaimed, looking up at the hole in the wall. "Sora," Orihime said, her voice cracking. She did not appear afraid. She didn't stare at him as if he were the monster who had just destroyed her home. She looked at him with the pure, unadulterated love of a little sister who had recently discovered her hero again. "You came back." Sora's tear-filled smile was the most heartbreaking and tragic Ichigo had ever witnessed. "I'm sorry, Orihime," Sora said, his voice trembling but clear. "I broke my promise. I did not protect you. I only caused you pain." "No," Orihime exclaimed, leaning out of the broken wall. "You've protected me my entire life. You gave me everything. You are not a monster, Sora." "You have a good life now," Sora said, gradually pushing himself to a standing position. His soul was beginning to shimmer, with a faint, golden light emanating from the edges of his body. The hollow corruption had vanished, and the natural order of the spiritual world was starting to call him away. "You got Tatsuki. You have friends. You don't have to pray to me every day anymore. You need to look ahead." He directed his gaze to Ichigo. The older brother looked at the teenage Shinigami with pleading eyes, carrying the ultimate, final request of a dying man. "Kurosaki," Sora replied softly. "Thank you for stopping me. Thank you for protecting her from me. Please, watch out for her." Ichigo met his gaze. He did not give empty platitudes. He did not smile. He gave a single, firm nod, the weight of the promise settling into his soul. "I will." Sora exhaled deeply and calmly. He closed his eyes and turned his head back to face the night sky. "Do it." Ichigo stepped forward. He did not raise his blade to strike. He reversed his grip and lifted the massive cloth-wrapped hilt of the Zanpakuto. He moved with a quiet, solemn reverence, completely different from the brutal brawler he had been moments before. He gently pressed the blunt base of the hilt against Sora Inoue's forehead. Soul burial. The point of contact emitted a bright, warm golden light. It was not the violent flash of a hollow's destruction, but the soft, comforting glow of a sunrise. The light completely enveloped Sora, washing away the last vestiges of his sorrow and guilt. "Goodbye, Orihime," Sora's voice echoed, sounding lighter and pain-free. "I love you." As the golden light flared, Sora Inoue's soul dispersed into warm particles. They swirled in the narrow alleyway for a moment, illuminating the dark brick walls, before drifting upward, carried away by the night wind to the Soul Society. Ichigo slowly lowers his sword. The alleyway fell completely silent, except for the distant sound of sirens approaching. In the ruined apartment, Orihime collapsed to her knees among the broken bricks, burying her face in her hands. She wept, her sobs echoing through the quiet night. However, they were no longer tears of terror or despair. They were tears of relief, as a heavy, suffocating wound was finally allowed to bleed out and begin to heal. Rukia Kuchiki emerged from the shadows of the alleyway. She looked to the spot where Sora had vanished, then up at the crying girl, and finally at Ichigo. The teenager stood with his back to her, leaning heavily on the massive Zanpakuto. His shoulders were slumped, and his head bowed. The night's emotional toll radiated off him in palpable waves of exhaustion. "You did well, Ichigo," Rukia said quietly, her voice lacking the usual aristocratic sharpness. "You cut the chain of sorrow. You saved both of them." Ichigo did not turn around. He stared at the melted asphalt, his chest heavy and silent, humming in a slow, mournful rhythm. "If this is what being a Shinigami means," Ichigo muttered, his voice hoarse and completely drained. "If it means watching people tear each other apart because they can't let go." He tightened his grip on the hilt of his blade, turning his knuckles white. "I suppose I have no choice but to keep swinging this damn sword." It was not like waking from a deep sleep, to wake after your soul had been violently pushed back into your physical body. It was like surviving a car accident. Ichigo Kurosaki opened his eyes. His gaze immediately went to the popcorn-textured ceiling of his bedroom. He stood still a long moment. His muscles felt as if they had been filled with lead overnight and left to harden. His joints pulsed with a deep, agonizing throb. A phantom reverberation from the sheer spiritual exertion of swinging the massive Zanpakuto. His skin was too tight, too cold, completely out of step with the humid morning air that drifted gently through the crack in his window. He swallowed, wincing at the old adrenaline drying the back of his throat, tasting metallic. I was alive, Ichigo thought, his mind slowly piecing together the events of the previous night. The narrow alley. The acid spray. The break of the bone-white mask. The golden light of Sora Inoe's soul at last at peace. "You're awake." The voice was sharp, too awake, and it was coming right out of his closet. The wooden door slid open with a soft click. Rukia Kuchiki came out, dressed in her Karakura High School uniform. In one hand she held a small green juice box, and in the other a freshly pressed handkerchief. She looked perfectly untroubled, no dark circles, no deep tiredness that Ichigo felt tugging at his bones. "Do you ever knock?" Ichigo groused, his voice cracking. Slowly he pushed himself up, his spine popping in 3 places. He threw his heavy legs over the edge of the mattress and set his bare feet on the cool hardwood floor. "This is my closet," Rukia said, taking a soft sip of the yellow straw. "And I've been awake for hours. You humans need an enormous amount of unconscious downtime to repair your fragile vessels." Ichigo ignored her condescension and rubbed his face with both hands. His thoughts went to the destroyed apartment. What happened after I blacked out? Their place was destroyed, Orihime and Tatsuki. Rukia crossed to his desk and put the juice box beside his alarm clock. The Kikanshinki was put into use. The Soul Society's memory replacement tool is very effective. Human authorities have attributed the destruction of the apartment to a localized gas explosion. Tragedy. Ichigo lowered his hands, looking at her with a troubled scowl. "And their memories?" "Rewritten," Rukia said, her dark eyes meeting his without a quiver. "Tatsuki Arisawa believes she was knocked out by the blast wave. Orihime Inoue suspects that her brother's shrine caught fire and ignited the gas line. They don't remember the hollow. They don't remember you in a dark kimono." Ichigo's stomach knotted up. A heavy, silent void throbbed with a slow, mournful beat in his chest. He loathed the lie. He hated that a deep moment of closure between a sister and a brother had been erased and replaced by a mundane tragedy. "It's not fair," Ichigo muttered, staring down at the floorboards. She finally got to say goodbye. "Fairness is a luxury that the spiritual world can never afford," Rukia said quietly, the sharpness leaving her tone. She knew how frustrated he was, more than she showed. If she remembered the truth, she would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for the monsters in the dark to come back. The lie allows her to heal. Ichigo didn't protest. He knew the logic was sound, but it tasted bitter. It wasn't just about swinging a sword, he was realizing. The need to protect meant to bear the heavy, unspoken truths so that others didn't have to. He got up, his legs shaking a little, and went to his dresser to get a clean uniform. Another day, another charade of normalcy. The flooded city of Ichigo's soul was unusually quiet miles beneath the waking world. The pale blue Shinigami water, which had been raging like a hurricane for the past few days, had finally settled into a deep, steady rhythm. Sideways glass skyscrapers cast long wavering shadows across the ocean floor. Naruto Uzumaki exhaled a slow bubble of silver at the bottom of the deepest trench. He leaned against the great stone pillar, the rusty chains biting into his wrists. His face was bandaged with pitch-black reishi, stained, but the dark spiritual blood had stopped flowing. The terrible work of projecting his immutable present to clear Ichigo's mind during the fight had worn down his crippled soul. However, Naruto was smiling. Behind the dark material was a wide, warm smile. The chronic, agonizing friction of his own anti-energy seemed a little more tolerable today. "You did good, kid," Naruto thought, his internal voice deep and resonant with pride. "You didn't give in to fear. You saw the pain. And you cut right through the cage." Naruto shifted his weight, the heavy chains clinking softly in the water. The Shinigami Reishi settled, the inner world becoming more defined. Naruto could feel the edges of the mindscape being forced back. He was not the only tenant here, he knew. From the far eastern edge of the flooded city, the sleeping Quincy power stirred, slightly. The water was unnervingly cold, and structured. A feral, chaotic pulse throbbed at its western edge, the hollow, white, restless and hungry, stirred by the taste of battle. Naruto's smile faded into a grim line of determination. "Sleep a little longer, you two," Naruto ordered the vacuum, releasing the heavy, absolute silence of his power outwards as a dampening field over the flooded city. "The kid's not ready for your racket yet. He needs some time to find his own feet." His chains did not trouble him. He felt no great desire to escape, to regain the divine power stolen from him by Yuwatch. His needs at this moment were simple, based completely in the present. He had to keep this inner world intact. He had to be the immovable anchor when the waves became too high. "Naruto had you, Ichigo," Naruto mused, his head tilted back against the cold stone, soothed by the steady, rhythmic pulse of the boy's heartbeat echoing from above. "Just keep going forward." The air outside was brisk in the morning, with the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes as Ichigo headed to school. The streets of Karakura town were busy with commuters and students. To the naked eye it seemed normal. But the world had gained an unbearable layer of texture for Ichigo. He could smell a plus at a bus stop, a faint, lingering sadness. He heard the static buzz of spiritual energy clinging to the telegraph wires. He walked beside Rukia, the two of them in a silent, tense truce. As they entered the classroom, the usual chaotic chatter was muted. Apparently, the word of the gas explosion in Orihime's apartment had spread throughout the student body. Ichigo walked to his desk in the back row, looking around the room. Tatsuki sat at her desk, a small white bandage taped to the temple. She was alive. She looked tired, without her usual fire. The door to the classroom slid open. Orihime entered. She wore a uniform, her bright orange hair pulled back with her trademark six-petaled flowers. She had a few small bandages on her arms from the flying glass, and her eyes were a little puffy with the unmistakable shadow of something recent and tragic. The classroom fell dead still. Everyone stared at her, not knowing what to say to the girl who just lost her home. Ichigo stopped breathing. He observed her closely, his heavy void beating in his chest. He steeled himself for the empty, shattered stare of a survivor. Orihime looked around the silent room. Then she smiled. This wasn't her normal spacey, too enthusiastic smile. It was smaller, softer, and unbelievably real. It was a fragile thing, built on new ruins, but it was real. "Morning all." Orihime's voice was a little rough, but steady. "Thanks for all the messages. I'm fine. I'm gonna be staying over at Tatsuki-chan's family for a while. We're gonna have a big sleepover." A collective sigh of relief went through the classroom. The tension broke and a few girls ran over and hugged her. Ichigo drew a long, quiet breath as his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. She didn't remember the hollow. She did not remember the gruesome transformation of her brother. But looking at her smile, Ichigo realized that the feeling of the soul burial had remained. The suffocating grief that had haunted her for years was gone. See? Rukia took a seat next to him. She whispered. The heart remembers peace, but the mind forgets the sword. Yeah, Ichigo muttered, pulling his textbook out of his bag. I see, yeah. The morning lessons passed in a haze of dull lectures and chalk dust. Ichigo had to keep his eyes open, his physical exhaustion weighing down his eyelids. In fact, he began to anticipate the lunch hour so he could rest his head on his desk and sleep for 20 minutes. The bell rang, signaling the start of lunch. The wooden chairs scraped across the floor as the students immediately grouped together, opening their bento boxes. Ichigo crossed his arms over his desk, anticipating that he'd bury his face within them when the classroom door slid open again. The air of the room did not change, it shifted. Yasutora Sato was standing in the doorway, but everyone called him Chad. Chad was a mountain of a teenager. He was well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe entirely. His dark skin, his shaggy brown hair that fell over his eyes, and his perpetual stoic expression gave him an incredibly intimidating aura. Despite his terrifying appearance, he was wearing a bright, garish Hawaiian shirt under his open school blazer. Yo, Chad, Ichigo said, lifting his head a bit. He and Chad had a silent, unspoken bond forged in countless fistfights with local hoodlums. They didn't say much, but they understood each other perfectly well. Chad gave a slow, deliberate nod toward Ichigo. He came into the classroom, his heavy boots making a dull thud on the linoleum. But as Chad approached, the heavy, silent emptiness in Ichigo's chest throbbed violently, warning. Ichigo's brown eyes got wider. Adrenaline shot through him like a cold spike, burning the exhaustion away. He sat bolt upright. The alarm was not raised by Chad's physical presence, it was the odor. There was a smell on the huge teenager that made the hair on the back of Ichigo's arms stand up. It was a bouquet, complex and horrifying. On the surface, there was the faint cold scent of a normal plus, the smell of a lingering ghost. But beneath it, clinging to the edges like a foul shadow, was the unmistakable, rotting copper smell of a hollow. Chad, Ichigo said, his voice an octave lower, no longer nonchalant. What did you do this morning? Chad approached Ichigo's desk. He reached into his pocket, his actions slow and deliberate. I learned something. He drew his great hand from his pocket and slowly opened his fingers. A little green parakeet lay in the palm of his hand. The bird appeared quite unremarkable. Its feathers were a bright green, its small black eyes darting nervously around the noisy classroom. It bounced a little in Chad's palm, making a tiny, high-pitched chirp. But to Ichigo's heightened spiritual senses, the bird was like a beacon of blinding light. The parakeet was not merely a bird. A translucent outline, outlining a young boy's soul, hovered about his small physical form. The chain of karma was firmly wrapped around the bird's neck, anchoring the plus to the bird. Found it down by the old overpass, Chad said, his voice a deep, rumbling softness as he looked down at the small thing. Some old guys were throwing rocks at it. I told them to stop. Knowing Chad, asking them to stop probably meant dumping 3 full-grown delinquents in a drainage ditch. A bird? You brought a bird to school? Keigo appeared from the row ahead, eyes wide. Keigo asked, you're crazy? Sensei Ochi is gonna have a heart attack. It looked lonely, said Chad, totally unbothered by Keigo's panic. Ichigo stood up from his desk, the chair scraping loudly. Keigo was ignored. He didn't mind the funny looks from the other students. He looked straight at the parakeet. The smell of the hollow was not coming from Chad. It was coming from the bird. The small creature was trailed by an invisible ribbon of foulness, a stench of rot. Kurosaki. Rukia whispered sharply, leaning in close to him. Her dark eyes were fixed on the parakeet and her jaw was set. You smell it? Yeah, Ichigo muttered, balling his fists at his sides. Souls marked, Rukia said grimly. It's being hunted by a hollow, and whoever has that bird. As carrying a target on their back, Ichigo finished, his brown eyes shifting from the small, shivering parakeet to Chad's stoic, unbothered face. Chad did not have any spiritual insight. He couldn't see the soul attached to the bird, and he couldn't smell the rotting copper behind him. He saw only a helpless animal in need of protection. Ichigo's veins sparked to life with the raw, blinding need to protect, drowning out the ache in his muscles, the exhaustion in his mind. He couldn't let his friend walk around with a beacon for a monster. Chad, Ichigo said, reaching his hand out. Hold on a minute, let me hold it. Before Chad could say anything, the parakeet ruffled its green feathers, stretched its little beak and spoke. It was not a copy of a whistle. It was not a duplication of a phrase. The voice was clear and audible and human, no doubt. That sounded like a scared little boy. I'm sorry, said the little parakeet, its little voice trembling with deep despair. I'm sorry. I can't get away from it. It's coming. The classroom fell silent. Keigo let his juice box fall. Even Chad's stone face split into an expression of genuine surprise. Ichigo's jaw tightened. The scent of the hollow suddenly sharpened, the invisible ribbon of rotting copper thickening, overwhelming, wafting in from the sky outside the open classroom window. It was not just arriving. Here it was. The classroom was completely silent and suffocating. Yasutora, Chad, Sato held a small, emerald-green parakeet in the palm of his massive hand, drawing the attention of 25 high school students. The bird had not simply mimicked a human sound. The sheer emotional weight of the apology, the raw, vibrating terror in its tiny voice, was too powerful to dismiss as a mere parlor trick. Keigo Asano swallowed hard, creating a loud sound in the quiet room. He slowly reached down and picked up his dropped juice box, his eyes wide and fixed on the bird. Did that thing just speak? How about we actually talk? It's a trick, Tatsuki Arisawa said, standing up from her desk, her brow furrowed with unease. Someone taught it to say that. Right, Chad? Chad didn't respond. His dark, stoic eyes stayed fixed on the parakeet. He couldn't see the little boy's translucent, weeping soul chained to the bird's neck, but he could feel the creature's small body shivering abnormally. He could sense a deep, heavy dread emanating from it. I apologize, the bird said, its voice cracking. I'm very sorry. Run away, please run away. Ichigo did not wait for another word. The toxic scent of rotting copper poured through the open classroom window and thickened with each passing second. The air pressure in the room was rapidly decreasing, making Ichigo's ears pop. The hollow was not just nearby, it was practically breathing down their necks, hovering somewhere in the overcast sky directly above the school courtyard. If the monster breached the building, 25 teenagers would be trapped in a concrete box with an unknown predator. Ichigo stood up and his chair scraped against the linoleum. He grabbed his school bag with one hand and marched straight toward Chad. Ichigo announced, "It's sick," in a firm and aggressive tone that cut through the room's growing panic. He grabbed Chad's thick forearm with an iron grip. The bird is ill. It is repeating what its owner has said because it is stressed. My father runs a clinic, and he knows someone who works with exotic pets. We're taking it right now. Kurosaki, lunch has just begun, Sensei Ochi warned, stepping out from behind her podium, though she appeared relieved to have the creepy animal out of her classroom. You cannot simply leave the school grounds. There's a medical emergency, Sensei. Family business, Ichigo interrupted smoothly, without breaking stride. He dragged Chad toward the sliding door. Rukia was already on her feet, carrying her backpack over her shoulder. She slipped right past Sensei Ochi, making an apologetic, aristocratic bow. I'll assist them, Sensei. I've dealt with avian distress before. The three quickly exited the room, leaving the teacher speechless. The pretense quickly dissipated once they entered the hallway. Ichigo shouted, "Move!" and dashed to the nearest stairwell. Chad, please keep that bird covered. Do not let go of it. Chad did not ask questions. He did not demand an explanation for Ichigo's sudden panic or the mysterious transfer student's involvement. He simply adjusted his grip, gently cupping his other massive hand over the parakeet to protect it, and followed Ichigo's pace, his long legs easily keeping up. Rukia ran alongside Ichigo, reaching into her blazer for the skull-marked glove. No, Ichigo grumbled, taking the stairs two at a time. Too confined. If it flies, we'll need the courtyard. Somewhere open and away from the windows. The water in the dark, sideways ocean of the inner mindscape has turned rancid. The Shinigami current, which had been flowing smoothly, suddenly tasted acidic and rusty. The bruised sky of the inner world darkened, and thick, unnatural clouds formed above the glass skyscrapers. Naruto Uzumaki emerged from the deep trench with glowing blue eyes. He understood what was approaching without seeing the physical world. The spiritual pressure of the incoming hollow was filtering down through Ichigo's heightened senses, and it was unlike any monster they had previously encountered. The centipede hollow was driven by insatiable hunger. Sora Inoue was a tragic soul transformed by suffocating, jealous love. However, with this new presence, Naruto's jaw clenched tightly beneath his black reishi bandages. His spiritual muscles tensed as he pulled against the heavy, rusted chains forged by the Soul King. This presence was pure malice. It was cruel. It didn't smell of tragedy or broken bonds. It smelled of deliberate, sadistic pleasure. It was the scent of a soul that had been evil in life but had found a larger canvas for its cruelty in death. Naruto recognized the smell of cold, hard anger emanating from the depths of the void. His thoughts returned to a lifetime ago, to Kakuzu's sickening, metallic chakra and Orochimaru's cold, reptilian malice. This is not a victim of the system. This predator enjoys playing with its prey. Naruto focused on the microscopic singularity of his anti-energy. The immutable present, the conceptual void that defined his crippled godhood, comes to life. He did not use his power to erase the hollow. Instead, he wrapped his heavy, silent energy around the core of Ichigo's being. He acted like a shock absorber. The hollow's sadistic spiritual pressure was intended to cause paralyzing terror, making its prey freeze like a deer in the headlights. Naruto commanded the void, his voice low and echoing with absolute authority. "You don't get to scare this child. I am holding the anchor. Allow him to feel your teeth, Ichigo. Don't hold back on this one." Ichigo rushed through the double doors to the courtyard, with Chad and Rukia following closely behind. The courtyard was mostly empty, as students had gathered in the cafeteria or roof for lunch. The sky above Karakura town was thick with gray clouds that blocked out the sun and cast a dreary, shadowless light on the concrete. The stench of rotting copper became overwhelming. Ggggg. The sound echoed in the sky. It was neither a roar nor a howl. Ichigo's skin crawled as he heard a high-pitched, chattering laugh, sickeningly cheerful, metallic. Ichigo came to a halt in the center of the courtyard, raising his head. Hovering 50 feet above them was a nightmare. It didn't resemble an animal. It had a vaguely humanoid upper body, heavily muscled and covered in a dark, greenish-black carapace. Its head was covered in a terrifying bone-white mask that resembled a twisted jester. Two massive, leathery wings spread from its back, keeping it aloft with slow, rhythmic flaps. Its legs terminated in sharp, three-toed talons, and instead of a tongue, a long, vibrating metal tuning fork protruded from its gaping mouth. "I discovered you," the hollow, shrieker, giggled, its voice tinged with sadistic glee. "Oh, little bird, you have brought me some new toys to play with." "Chad, get down," Ichigo yelled and pushed his friend backward. Despite his massive frame, Chad stumbled and cupped his hands over the parakeet for protection. He looked up at the empty sky, his brow furrowed in perplexity. He couldn't see the grinning monster hovering above them, but he could feel the sudden, terrifying drop in air pressure, and the hairs on his arms stood up. "What is it?" Chad inquired, his deep voice remarkably stable despite the invisible threat. Rukia stepped between Chad and Ichigo, saying, "There's no time to explain." She removed the thick, white glove from her blazer, the blue skull insignia glaring in the dim lighting. She did not ask for permission. She lunged forward, slamming her open palm into Ichigo's chest. Bam! The violent ejection occurred instantly. The world's heavy, physical gravity fell away. Ichigo stumbled backward and gasped as his pale blue Shinigami power exploded in the courtyard. The black Shiakusho appeared over his spiritual body, the loose white sash snapping in the wind caused by his own reishi. The massive, unpolished Zanpakuto sat heavily across his back. His body fell forward, completely limp. Chad exhibited exceptional reflexes for a teenager his size. He dropped to one knee, holding the parakeet against his chest with his left arm and catching Ichigo's unconscious physical body with his right, preventing his friend's head from hitting the concrete. "Ichigo," Chad grunted and shook the boy's shoulder. "Hey. He is fine," Rukia said calmly, taking a step back. "But you have to stay right where you are, Yasutora Sato. Don't move." Shrieker, hovering above them, let out another chattering giggle. The hollow's masked eyes narrowed, focusing on the sudden, blinding pillar of spiritual pressure that had recently erupted in the courtyard. "A Shinigami?" Shrieker cackled, the tuning fork in its mouth vibrating quickly and emitting a high-pitched, piercing whine. "Oh, this is fantastic. The tiny bird brought me a soul reaper. It's been decades since I killed one of your kind. Ichigo did not respond to the taunt. The heavy, silent void in his chest hummed with flawless, diamond-hard clarity, anchoring his explosive power. He reached over his shoulder and wrapped his hand tightly around the cloth-wrapped hilt of his massive cleaver. Shhhhng. He drew the giant blade, and the steel's kinetic force blew loose leaves and dirt away from the courtyard in a perfect circle. He gripped the hilt with both hands, lowering his center of gravity, his brown eyes filled with a cold, pale blue glow. Ichigo challenged, "Come down here." His voice was calm. "Why should I do that?" Shrieker laughed and flapped its massive leathery wings, gaining another 10 feet of altitude. "When do I have such wonderful toys to share?" The hollow raised their right hand. Instead of claws, its fingers formed strange, bulbous suction cups. It clenched its fist, and dozens of small, slug-like creatures erupted from its pores. They rained down from above, wriggling blindly in the air. "Leeches?" Ichigo muttered, his gaze following the falling slugs. "Bombs," Rukia corrected sharply, her voice filled with alarm. "Ichigo, intercept them. If they attach to Chad, they will explode." Ichigo did not hesitate. The moment Rukia said the word, "bombs," the roaring furnace of his power flared. He disappeared from his spot on the concrete. Chad, who was kneeling on the ground holding Ichigo's physical body, felt like the world had gone insane. He couldn't see the Shinigami, or the falling leeches. But he felt a sudden, localized hurricane of wind as an invisible force ripped through the air directly above him. Ichigo appeared 5 feet above Chad and spun his massive Zanpakuto like a helicopter rotor. The broad, flat side of the colossal blade deflected falling leeches before they reached the ground. The impact did not cut them, rather, it violently redirected their momentum, swatting them into the school's brick walls and distant chain-link fences. "Catch!" Shrieker laughed from above. The hollow closed its jaws, the tuning fork on its tongue vibrating with a harsh metallic clink. Ichigo swatted away the leeches, which detonated instantly. The explosions were deafening. Plumes of black smoke and orange fire erupted along the school's walls, shattering several second-story windows and sending a shower of broken glass down onto the courtyard. The shockwaves struck Ichigo in midair, knocking him off balance and forcing him to land hard on his feet, his sandals skidding backward across the concrete. "What was that?" Chad yelled, shielding the bird and Ichigo's physical body with his broad back as debris rained down on them. The sheer volume of the explosions demonstrated without a doubt that they were being attacked by something completely beyond human comprehension. "Stay down, Chad," Ichigo yelled and stepped in front of his friend. He held the massive cleaver defensively, his gaze fixed on the sky. The smoke from the explosions filled the courtyard with the smell of sulfur and burning bricks. Shrieker flew above the smoke, flapping its leathery wings lazily. "Oh, you are quick for a brute wielding a large knife. But you can't protect them indefinitely. I have hundreds of little friends, and they are extremely hungry." Ichigo gritted his teeth and trembled slightly due to the weight of the Zanpakuto. "He understands I can't reach him up there. He'll simply keep dropping bombs on us until we make a mistake." Rukia instructed to force the hollow into close combat while analyzing his movements. His spiritual pressure is concentrated in his projectiles. His physical body is fairly weak. If you can close the gap and strike his mask, he will fall. Ichigo snapped back, "I don't have wings, Rukia, in case you didn't notice." "You do not need wings, kid." The thought was not Ichigo's. It bloomed in the back of his mind, a warm, resonant echo emanating directly from the silence in his chest. It bore the weight of ancient, impossible battles between gods and monsters in skies that had burned red and purple. "You have Reishi. You possess raw, unfiltered power. Stop treating it like a battery and instead treat it as a solid object. Condense it beneath your feet. Stand in the air." Ichigo blinked. The concept seemed absurd. Standing on air defied every fundamental physical law he'd ever known. However, he was now a spirit. He was wielding a door-sized sword and fighting a laughing monster that threw explosive slugs. Physics had left the building long ago. He trusted the anchor in his soul. Ichigo closed his eyes briefly. He stopped attempting to direct the explosive, pale blue energy outward. Instead, he drew it inward, sending a massive surge of reishi straight down his legs and compressing it against the soles of his woven sandals. "Hey, ugly," Ichigo exclaimed, opening his eyes. They emitted a blinding, concentrated blue light. Shrieker paused its giggling and tilted its mask in confusion. Ichigo bent his knees and pushed off the concrete. He did not jump. He took off. The compressed reishi beneath his feet exploded like a rocket booster, cracking the courtyard's solid concrete and propelling him straight up into the gray sky at terrifying speeds. He flew past the 20-foot mark, the wind roaring in his ears. When gravity tried to pull him back down, Ichigo gritted his teeth and pressed another pulse of reishi beneath him. Bang! A pale blue disk of condensed spiritual energy appeared in the empty air for a microsecond. Ichigo's sandal struck it, treating it as solid ground, and he launched himself higher, zigzagging through the air. "What?" Shrieker screamed, the sadistic glee completely gone from its voice. The hollow desperately raised its hand, letting out another volley of leeches. Ichigo did not swat them away this time. He moved at blinding speed, kicking off invisible footholds in the air and darting around falling bombs. He closed the 50-foot gap in 3 heartbeats, appearing directly in front of the hovering hollow. "I told you," Ichigo roared, pulling the massive Zanpakuto back with both hands, the steel gleaming against the dark clouds. He swung the massive blade horizontally, aiming directly at the hollow's leathery wings. Shrieker had little time to react. The hollow raised its thick, armored forearm, attempting to block the massive slab of steel. Clang! The impact reverberated in the sky like a thunderclap. Ichigo's raw power shattered the hollow's carapace, biting deeply into the bone of its forearm. Shrieker howled in agony, disrupting the vibration of its tuning fork tongue. The physical blow sent the monster plummeting from the sky, its leathery wings folding uselessly as it crashed down into the concrete courtyard below. Ichigo hung in the air for a second, standing on a final, flickering disk of blue reishi with his chest heaving and the giant sword held loosely at his side. He stared down at the falling monster, his brown eyes cold and unyielding. He was no longer limited to swinging the sword on the ground. He now had complete control over the skies. The effect was devastating. Shrieker dropped from the gray overcast sky like a meteor of rotting flesh and dark armor. The hollow crashed into the center of the school courtyard with a deafening boom that shook the foundations of the surrounding buildings violently. The solid concrete strained and broke inward, forming a huge spider web of a crater 10 feet across. A cloud of powdery gray dust and pulverized rock exploded outward, washing over the courtyard in a blinding wave. Yasutora, Chad, Sado dropped to his knees, his broad back to the epicenter of the crash. He bent down, his great arms enfolding the trembling green parakeet and Ichigo Kurisaki's flaccid physical form. Hail, chunks of concrete and debris, hammered his back, but he didn't make a sound. The monsters in the sky he couldn't see. He didn't see the invisible sword that had just swatted a nightmare out of the air. But he believed the boy who told him to stay low. Dust started to settle and an oppressive, unnatural quiet fell over the courtyard. Ichigo Kurosaki stood on a faintly glowing, pale blue disk of condensed reishi 50 feet above and exhaled a slow, ragged breath. He felt his arms ache from the mere effort of swinging the giant Zanpakuto in midair. He peered down into the spinning dust cloud, his brown eyes squinting, the heavy, silent void in his chest buzzing a low, steady warning. He didn't let gravity determine how he fell. Ichigo bent his knees and pushed off the invisible foothold, falling like a rock. He stepped lightly to the edge of the crater, his woven sandals absorbing the impact, the great cleaver gripped firmly in his hand. "Is it dead?" Ichigo called out, not taking his eyes off the middle of the dust. "Keep your head up." Rukia Kuchiki coughed from the sidelines, the concrete dust chafing her synthetic lungs. One blow to an extremity does not purge a hollow of this density, but its mask is still intact. A low, wet, gurgling sound came from the bottom of the crater, as if on cue. GG. GGGGG. The dust was blown aside, wrenched away by a sudden localized blast of foul spiritual pressure. The Shrieker pulled its titanic, humanoid torso out of the ruins. The hollow's left arm hung uselessly at its side, the carapace completely shattered by Ichigo's blade, leaking thick, dark purple reishi that sizzled against the concrete. But the hollow was no longer screaming in agony. It was laughing. The metallic tuning fork on its tongue vibrated quickly, producing a shrill, headache-inducing whine. "You hit hard, Shinigami," Shrieker chattered, his jester-like mask tilting sideways as it grinned up at him. But you don't get the idea of the game. You think you're rescuing the little bird? You're spoiling the fun? Ichigo took a slow step forward into the crater. I don't play games with monsters, he said. He raised the giant sword and aimed the blunt end at the smiling face of the hollow. But the boy is playing. Oh, Shrieker cackled and pointed a finger with a suction cup tip at where Chad was kneeling. Don't you Ichi, tell the nice Soul Reaper the rules of our little game? The little green parakeet quivered violently in the protective grip of Chad. The little boy's soul was translucent and weeping, chained to the bird's neck, and curled up in utter despair. I'm sorry, echoed the small voice from the bird's beak, filled with such deep sorrow that Ichigo felt it in his heart. I'm sorry, I only wanted to save her. Save who? Ichigo demanded, hands tightening around his hilt. His mother, of course. Shrieker slapped its one good hand to its thigh, thoroughly enjoying the misery it was causing. I told the little brat that if he could run away from me and keep that bird alive for 3 months I would resurrect his dead mother. He's been running for weeks. Is he not brave? He actually believes a hollow can raise the dead? The hollow laughed a metallic laugh that shrieked through the courtyard. And the best part is, Shrieker leant forwards, the hollow eyes flashing with pure sadistic cruelty. Every time somebody tries to help him, every time some nice, heroic soul like that big human over there picks the bird up, I get to blow them to pieces. It's a 2-for-1 meal. The pure, unfiltered malice of the statement was in the cold air. This was not an animal guided by instinct. This was not a tragic soul twisted by a broken heart. It was a predator that tortured children for its own amusement. It fed on hope as much as it fed on souls, tearing it away at the last possible second for maximum agony. Ichigo came to a halt. He lowered his sword until the blade touched the cracked concrete. His breath slowed. And just like that, the burning, explosive rage that had been swelling in his chest disappeared, devoured whole by the ancient, heavy presence deep inside of him. Dead silent, terrifyingly so, was the flooded city of the inner mindscape, miles beneath the physical world. The Shinigami River, a roaring river of pale blue, stopped its chaotic churning. The water flattened out, smooth and perfect as a sheet of glass. At the bottom of the deepest trench, Naruto Uzumaki stopped pulling at his chains. The crippled god of the void did not smile. He didn't give a nice warm comforting rumble. His face, under the pitch-black reishi bandages wrapped around it, became a mask of cold, absolute judgment. He'd dedicated his life to battling villains who believed they were saviors and monsters who had been forced into their roles by cruel systems. He always tried to find the human heart under the hatred. He'd contacted Nagato, contacted Obito, contacted Sasuke. But he'd also fought things like Kakuzu, beings who just enjoyed the murder. There was no heart left in that thing to save. Naruto's voice echoed through the silent, flooded city. It wasn't a roar, it was a whisper with the dreadful weight of a collapsing star. Naruto focused the conceptual power of his immutable present inward. He didn't give Ichigo any new technique. He didn't lend him physical strength. He just reached up and totally wrapped his anti-energy around Ichigo's raw chaotic teenage emotions. He took Ichigo's blinding fury, disgust, and panic and wiped them completely away. He cut all the noise, leaving only a diamond-hard, terrifyingly cold intent to execute. Don't yell at it, Ichigo, Naruto ordered the void, the reishi chains around his wrists glowing faintly. Don't interact with it. Don't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Monsters like this thrive on your anger. Let it starve. Just come in and rub it off. Shrieker's laugh faded slowly in the courtyard. The hollow cocked its grinning mask, waiting for the Shinigami to scream, to charge in blindly, to throw a furious tantrum at the cruelty of the game. Instead, Ichigo Kurosaki just looked at him. The brown eyes of the teenager were without heat. They were completely cold, and they glowed with a thick, smothering pale blue light that seemed to be stifling. The pressure in the courtyard dropped even further. The concrete dust that floated in the air didn't blow away, but rather was forced down to the ground by the immense gravity of Ichigo's condensed spiritual pressure. Shrieker took a step back, involuntarily, its talon grating loudly on the broken concrete. The tuning fork of the hollow vibrated nervously. Why don't you get angry? I am going to eat the boy's soul before your very eyes. Ichigo didn't reply. He wouldn't waste his breath on a dead thing. He dragged the massive Zanpakuto over the concrete, steel shrieking as it cut a deep rut in the ground, and began to walk. His pace was slow, deliberate and utterly unavoidable. Panic, a rare and unfamiliar emotion to the sadistic Hollow, suddenly flashed in Shrieker's hollow chest. "Stay back," Shrieker shrieked, raising its unhurt right hand. The bulbous suction cups on its fingers flared, and it violently ejected a huge cloud of explosive leeches. Dozens of the slug-like bombs darted through the air in a wide arc, missing Ichigo entirely and heading straight for Chad and the parakeet behind him. "Checkmate!" Shrieker cackled in wild glee, snapping its jaws to set off the explosion. Ichigo didn't change his face, he didn't meet Chad's eyes, he didn't go nuts. Both hands were gripping his Zanpakuto, and twisting his waist, he brought the massive blade around in a brutal, diagonal upswing. He did not strike the leeches physically. He wasn't needed. The sheer, overwhelming density of his Shinigami Reishi, flawlessly focused by the silent anchor in his soul, tore itself away from the edge of the steel. A massive crescent of pale blue spiritual pressure exploded from the blade, rushing backwards over his own shoulder. The wave of pure energy took out the swarm of leeches in the air. Click. Shrieker's tuning fork set off the bombs. They blew up, just the explosions never touched Chad. Ichigo's Reishi was a localized wave, an impenetrable moving wall, and it completely absorbed the fire and shockwaves, neutralizing the threat in a spectacular burst of blue and orange light, high above the courtyard. Shrieker froze, petrified in sheer terror, its mask of grinning terror frozen. When the light from the explosions died down, Ichigo was already there. He'd used the flash as cover, squishing Reishi beneath his sandals to shoot himself into the Hollow's personal space. He was barely a few inches away from Shrieker, the massive Zanpakuto already drawn back over his shoulder. "It's over," Ichigo said softly. He swung the enormous cleaver in a perfect shattering vertical blow. The blade sliced cleanly through the Hollow's right shoulder, down through its ribcage, and out near its hip. The thick armored carapace was no match whatsoever for the terrifying, unyielding weight of Ichigo's intent. Shrieker didn't even get a chance to yell. The Hollow broke, its body cleaved in half, crashing hard onto the cracked concrete of the crater. Purple spirit blood pooled fast around the grinning bone-white mask. Ichigo moved forward, stomping his woven sandal firmly into the center of the Hollow's chest, pinning it to the ground. He shifted his hold on the huge Zanpakuto, the razor-sharp tip pointed directly down, an inch over the center of Shrieker's smiling face. "Wait!" Shrieker gurgled, its voice bubbling up with its own evil blood. The sadistic glee was gone altogether, replaced by groveling desperation, pathetic. "Wait! Shinigami! Don't purify me. I'll leave the bird alone. I'll go back to Hueco Mundo. Just leave me be." Ichigo looked down at the mask, feeling the heavy ancient presence of the void in his chest hum in silent agreement. "I don't deal with monsters," Ichigo said. He brought the massive blade down, punching the steel through the center of the bone-white mask, pinning the Hollow's skull flat against the concrete below. The mask broke into 1,000 pieces. This was usually the time for cleansing. It was the moment when the Hollow's tainted Reishi would turn to blinding white or golden light, washing away the sorrow and sending the cleansed soul to Soul Society to rest. But the blade went through Shrieker's core and there was no warm light. But instead a thick suffocating wave of heat washed over the courtyard. The air temperature soared violently, the humid gray afternoon like the inside of a blast furnace. The stench of rotting copper was instantly overwhelmed by the overpowering, nauseating stench of pure sulfur and burning, charred meat. Ichigo stepped back, wrenching his Zanpakuto free, brow furrowed in deep confusion. The Hollow wasn't falling apart into glowing pieces. The body was turning into a thick black ash, swirling quickly in the air, but the ash was not vanishing. It was being yanked back, dragged to a point in the air behind where the Hollow had fallen. "Rukia?" Ichigo called, not taking his eyes off the swirling black ash. "What's going on? Why it doesn't cleanse?" Rukia ran ahead and stopped a few feet behind Ichigo. Her black eyes were wide, reflecting a kind of deep, animal awe and fear. Rukia said softly, reverently, "Step back, Ichigo. Yes, a Zanpakuto is a tool of purging. It expiates the sins a soul committed after death, when it was corrupted as a Hollow. They can go into the Soul Society without being defiled. She pointed to the swirling ash. But, a Zanpakuto cannot wash away the sins committed when the soul was still alive. The area behind the dissolving hollow began to twist violently. The air literally tore apart, a jagged rent ripping through the fabric of the physical world. The tear was giving out something great. Two great bony doors reared from the concrete, 30 feet high in the gray sky. The doors were made of dark petrified bone and thick rusted iron. They were wrapped up tight in thick, impossibly large chains. The spiritual weight pouring from the structure was too much for Ichigo to bear, and he had to drive his sword into the ground just to stay standing. If a soul was a murderer in life, Rukia whispered, looking up at the terrifying monolith, if they've committed atrocities of pure malice before they ever became a hollow, the Soul Society does not accept them. Suddenly the great chains coiled about the skeletal doors snapped, and the iron links shattered with the sound of ringing church bells. The doors slowly grind open. Darkness filled the interior. There was only absolute pitch-black darkness, broken by deep, blood-red flashes of hellfire. The agonizing heat from the open doors, the distant overlapping screams of thousands of agonized souls. The gates of hell, Rukia said. A huge, muscular arm wrapped in white bandages poked out from the pitch-black void between the doors. It was not of man. It was a warden's arm. The giant hand came down, closing its fingers around the remaining upper half of Shrieker's body. No, shrieked Shrieker, its voice suddenly back, filled with an absolute, cosmic terror that dwarfed anything Ichigo had ever heard. No, please. Not there, don't make me go back, please. The big, bandaged hand did not hesitate. It held on tighter and crushed the last of the hollow's carapace, dragging the screaming, pathetic soul back with violence. Shrieker was pulled directly into the dark. The skeletal doors slammed shut with a concussive force that stole the breath from Ichigo's lungs. The huge locks slammed shut with a final, heavy clang. For a moment the towering gates of hell were silent in the ruined courtyard, an ancient, terrible monument to the cosmic justice. Then they just unrolled, melting into the gray afternoon air like they'd never been there, taking the heat and the sulfur and the screaming with them. The yard was quiet again. Ichigo stood there, hands on the hilt of his massive Zanpakuto, staring at the empty space where the gates had been. The heavy, silent emptiness in his chest hummed steadily and calmly again. He had rescued the boy. But looking back at Chad, still kneeling protectively over the shivering parakeet, Ichigo understood the depth of the world he had been pulled into. He wasn't just battling monsters in the dark. He was walking the razor's edge between salvation and utter damnation. The oppressive, suffocating heat that had accompanied the gates of hell vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the school courtyard unsettlingly cold. The harsh scent of sulfur and charred meat was quickly carried away by the damp afternoon wind, leaving behind the mundane smells of concrete dust and impending rain. Ichigo Kurosaki stood motionless in his black shiakusho. He leaned heavily on the cloth-wrapped hilt of his massive Zanpakuto, staring at the empty space where the skeletal doors had closed. His chest heaved as his spiritual lungs drew in deep, ragged breaths. "It is over," Rukia Kuchiki said softly, stepping up beside him. Her synthetic school uniform was covered in a fine layer of gray dust, but her posture was perfectly straight. "The hollow's gone. Hell has claimed its due." Ichigo did not respond immediately. The heavy, silent void in his chest had settled into a slow, steady rhythm, but the echo of Shrieker's utter terror lingered in his ears. It was one thing to cleanse a corrupted soul, or to wash away a monster and lay it to rest. It was entirely different to witness a soul being dragged screaming into the darkness. He scraped the colossal blade from the cracked concrete and slid it onto his back. He turned away from the crater and walked to the courtyard's edge. Yasutora. Chad. Sado was still kneeling on the ground. His broad back was covered in cuts and bruises from the flying debris, and his garish Hawaiian shirt was torn in multiple places. He had curled his massive frame into a protective dome, completely surrounding Ichigo's unconscious physical body and the small green parakeet. As Ichigo approached, Chad gradually raised his head. His dark hair was covered in dust, and his stoic face bore a rare expression of deep, lingering tension. He could not see Ichigo in his Shinigami form. He only saw the ruined courtyard, the massive crater, and the dissipating dust cloud. "Is it gone?" the small, reedy voice of the parakeet inquired. Chad gazed down at his cupped hands. He opened his fingers slightly, allowing the bird to peek out. For Chad, it was just a shivering animal. Ichigo saw little Yuichi Shibata's weeping soul clinging to the bird's neck, dragging the frayed chain of karma across the concrete. "Yes, kid," Ichigo said, pausing a few feet away. His voice was exhausted and lacked the harsh edge he usually possessed. "It is gone. The monster cannot harm you anymore." Yuichi's soul looked upward. He could see Ichigo clearly, recognizing the giant sword and black robes of the Soul Reaper that the Hollow had been terrified of. The little boy's lip trembled, and tears welled in his large, terrified eyes. But my mother," Yuichi sniffled, burying his face against the bird's green feathers. "The monster said that if I kept running, he would bring her back. He promised. I ran for a long time. I just wanted to see her again." The words felt like a physical weight on Ichigo's shoulders. He dropped to one knee, lowering himself to the boy's eye level. He despised this. He despised being the one to snuff out the only hope a terrified child had, even if that hope was a lie created by a sadistic predator. "I'm sorry, Yuichi," Ichigo said softly. "He lied to you. Monsters like that, they do not bring people back. They simply use what you want most to harm you." Yuichi sobbed deeply and shook his small, translucent shoulders violently. "Then I'm completely alone. I have nowhere to go." "That is not true," Rukia said, stepping up beside Ichigo. She looked down at the boy with a solemn, respectful expression. "Little one, you no longer belong in the world of the living. It is time for you to visit the Soul Society." Yuichi looked at her through tears, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "The Soul Society? Is my mother there?" Rukia maintained a warm tone and avoided making false promises. "The Soul Society is vast. It is where all purified souls can rest. Many families who are separated by death eventually reunite there. It's a peaceful place. You won't need to run anymore. You won't have to hide." Ichigo observed the boy closely. The boy's frayed chain of karma was held together only by his overwhelming desire to find his mother. "She is waiting for you, kid," Ichigo said, his voice a low, steady rumble of reassurance. He freed his massive Zanpakuto by reaching over his shoulder and gripping the hilt. "But you won't find her if you stay here, stuck to a bird. Allow me to send you to her." Yuichi hesitated in front of the massive steel slab. Then he looked into Ichigo's brown eyes and saw the deep, unyielding anchor of protection hidden within them. The little boy took a deep, shuddering breath before nodding. "Okay," Yuichi whispered. "Thank you, Mr. Shinigami. And thank you, big guy." He glanced down at Chad, who was still holding the parakeet gently. Chad couldn't hear the ghost, but he could sense the sudden, profound stillness in the air. Ichigo adjusted his grip on the cloth-wrapped hilt. He moved slowly and deliberately, turning the blade so that the flat, blunt hilt faced the boy. He lightly pressed the steel against the center of Yuichi's translucent forehead. Soul Burial. A bright golden light emitted from the point of contact. It washed over the ruined courtyard, eliminating the chill of the hollow's malice. The light completely enveloped Yuichi, lifting his small soul away from the green parakeet. The boy smiled, tears drying as the burden of his constant running was lifted. He waved a small hand at Ichigo as his form disintegrated into thousands of glowing, golden particles that drifted upward into the gray afternoon sky, caught up in the invisible currents that led to the next realm. Ichigo slowly lowered his sword, observing the lights fade until the sky became empty again. The green parakeet on the ground chirped normally. It hopped out of Chad's grasp, fluttering its wings, and flew up to land on a branch of a nearby cherry blossom tree, free of the heavy spiritual anchor it had been carrying. "It's done," Rukia said quietly, slipping the skull-marked glove on her right hand. She looked at Ichigo. "Brace yourself. The return to your physical vessel is rarely pleasant." Rukia slammed her open palm against Ichigo's spiritual chest, leaving him with little time to scowl. The flooded city shuddered violently. When Ichigo returned to his physical body, the mindscape's gravity hit him hard. The pale blue Shinigami water, which had been floating in weightless spheres, crashed into the trenches like a collapsing tidal wave. Naruto Uzumaki grunted at the bottom of the ocean, pinned against a sunken stone pillar by heavy waters. The crippled god of the void exhaled silver bubbles and closed his eyes beneath his reishi bandages. The physical exertion of the fight had ended, but the emotional resonance continued to filter down like falling ash. Naruto witnessed the gates of hell open. He had felt the universe's absolute, unbreakable cosmic bureaucracy. Naruto reflected, "It's a rigid world, Ichigo," his internal voice echoing through the dark, settling water with a heavy, ancient weariness. "In my previous life, we fought to end the cycle of hatred. We believed that anyone could be redeemed if they simply reached out their hand. But this place draws sharp distinctions. You are either purified or burnt." As Naruto strained against the rusted chains, he felt the agonizing friction of his own anti-energy against his soul. He was the immutable present. He was the absolute void. In a world ruled by such terrifying, mechanical afterlife laws, a god of nothingness was a dangerous outlier. Naruto felt a deep sense of empathy as he thought, "You'll see a lot of terrible things, kid. You will have to make decisions that do not have a clear answer. But as long as you keep swinging that blade to protect those who stand behind you, I will prevent the foundation from cracking. Let the Soul Society set its own rules. We will maintain our own line." Ichigo gasped, his eyes widening. The feeling of returning to his body was agonizing. The deep, throbbing soreness in his muscles returned immediately, amplified tenfold by the brutal exertion of the spiritual battle. The cold, damp concrete beneath his back felt way too hard. He groaned, rolled to his side, and slowly pushed himself to a sitting position. His head spun wildly. Chad was standing over him. The teenager looked down at Ichigo, his dark hair casting shadows over his stoic eyes. Chad did not say anything. He reached down and offered his large, calloused hand. Ichigo took a firm grip on the hand after a brief moment of observation. Chad effortlessly lifted him to his feet, but Ichigo's knees buckled, forcing him to lean heavily on his friend's broad shoulder. Chad observed the courtyard's massive crater, shattered concrete, and dusty atmosphere. Then he looked down at the empty space in his hands where the bird had once been. He had not seen the Shinigami. He had not seen the hollow. "You did this," Chad said, his deep voice a quiet rumble that did not form a question, but rather a statement of absolute truth. Ichigo swallowed the dry taste of dust in his mouth. He looked at Chad, his chest tightening. He wanted to lie. He wanted to keep Chad away from the monsters that lurked in the invisible world by preserving the mundane reality of his friend's life. But looking into Chad's unwavering, loyal eyes, the lie felt insulting. "Yeah," Ichigo said, his voice hoarse. "I did." Chad did not ask how. He didn't ask for an explanation about magical swords, invisible monsters, or the transfer student standing quietly a few feet away. His desire for answers was completely secondary to his faith in the boy standing beside him. Chad picked up Ichigo's canvas school bag and slung it over his uninjured shoulder. "Let's return to class," Chad stated simply. "Sensei Ochi is gonna be mad." Ichigo let out a weak, breathy laugh, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Yeah, she is going to kill us." The three of them walked away from the ruined courtyard, slipping back into the school building before the faculty could discover the epicenter of the gas explosion that undoubtedly caused the damage. The rain started late that evening. A steady, rhythmic drizzle washed the dust from Karakura town's streets and gently drummed against the roof of the Kurosaki clinic. Ichigo sat at the small kitchen table and stared blankly at a bowl of steaming rice and grilled mackerel. The clinic's waiting room remained sealed off by the heavy blue construction tarp, which muffled the sounds of the rain. Yuzu noticed Ichi-ni hadn't touched her food and paused her dishwashing to express her concern. "Do you feel sick? You've looked so pale this week." Karen sat across from him and kicked her legs lightly against the chair. She narrowed her dark eyes and examined him with her usual keen intuition. "Ichigo, you look like you were run over by a train. And not the one that allegedly struck our house." "I'm fine," Ichigo said, forcing himself to pick up his chopsticks. His hand trembled slightly with muscle fatigue. "I'm just tired. We had a pop quiz in English today. It drained me." He took a bite of rice and chewed mechanically. He desperately needed some normalcy. He needed the smell of Yuzu's cooking and Karen's sharp banter to keep him grounded. The heavy, silent void in his chest hummed a low, comforting vibration, a quiet anchor to keep his thoughts from wandering back to the gates of hell. "Well, eat up," Isshin Kurosaki said, suddenly sliding into the chair next to Ichigo with a loud, obnoxious grin. He slapped a heavy hand on Ichigo's bruised shoulder, causing the teenager to wince sharply. A growing boy needs protein. Especially if he wants to survive the harsh, unforgiving battlefield of high school romance. Shut up, old man, Ichigo grumbled, shoving his father's hand away. His irritation lacked the usual fire. Rukia Kuchiki sat cross-legged in Ichigo's closet and held her knees to her chest. She heard the muffled, chaotic sounds of the Kurosaki family dinner through the floorboards. Her synthetic body didn't need much sleep, but the day's emotional exhaustion was heavy on her mind. She reflected on Ichigo's intense spiritual pressure. He lacked discipline, but he had an ocean of reishi that defied logic. And beneath the roaring power, she sensed something else. A deep, unyielding stillness that held him together when he should have broken. Rukia reflected, resting her chin on her knees in the darkness, but he is just what this town needs. A few miles away, rain fell steadily on the quiet, empty streets of a residential district. A figure dressed in white stood perfectly still atop a wet telephone pole. He did not wear the black robes of a soul reaper. He was dressed in a pristine, tailored white uniform with a high collar made of completely water-resistant fabric. A silver cross dangled from a chain around his left wrist, catching the dim, ambient light from the street lamps below. Uryu Ishida pushed his square-framed glasses up his nose with his middle finger. The lenses flashed white in the dark. He was not looking at the streets. He was staring across the vast expanse of Karakura town, his sharp, calculating eyes fixed on the Kurosaki clinic. Uryu sensed the spiritual pressure that had erupted over the school earlier that day, even from a distance. It was clumsy. It was loud. It was an unmistakable signature of a Shinigami. The Soul Reapers have finally decided to show their faces in my city, Uryu murmured to the cold rain, his voice crisp and devoid of warmth. He reached into his white uniform's breast pocket and lightly touched the cold metal of a hollow silver tube. His desire was not to maintain the balance of souls, nor was it to adhere to the strict rules of the afterlife. His need was unique, stemming from deep, ancestral pride and a burning, unresolved grief. He needed to prove the Quincy were superior. Uryu whispered, "Enjoy your victory today, Shinigami," before disappearing into the rainy night in a blur of white motion. Your monopoly on the world is about to end. The human body was not meant to be empty. This harsh truth Ichigo Kurosaki learned over the next week. The toll was heavier every time Rukia used the skull-marked glove to forcibly tear his soul out of his physical shell. While his soul fought hollows, his physical body didn't just sleep, it shut down, falling to the pavement like a puppet with its strings cut. When he was pushed back into the re-entry was brutal. It was a violent collision of high-density spiritual reishi suddenly forced into a fragile container of flesh and bone. His joints hurt all the time. His muscles hurt. He was drinking 3 cups of black coffee a day and still nodding off standing up on the train. Kurosaki. The sharp whisper pierced Ichigo's fog of exhaustion. In afternoon history class he sat at his desk with his cheek flat against the cool wood, his eyes half closed. Kurosaki, get up. Thwack. A pencil's blunt end jabbed hard into his ribs. Ichigo flinched, his brown eyes flying open. He slowly turned his head to glare at the desk next to him. Rukia Kuchiki sat upright, book open, aristocratic perfection. But under the edge of her desk she clutched the pencil like a spear, ready for another blow. Quit that, Ichigo muttered in his raspy whisper. I was awake. Rukia spoke softly, not looking at him. You were drooling all over the Edo period timeline. Your stamina is turning into a serious problem. If a hollow attacks you in the middle of the day, your physical body falls down wherever you are standing. What if you're crossing a street? Imagine you are standing close to a ledge. Ichigo winced, rubbing his ribs. He knew she was correct. Chad had been there to catch Shrieker as he fell when he'd attacked the courtyard. But Chad didn't know the truth, and Ichigo couldn't always count on his friend to act as a bodyguard when an invisible monster showed up. So what am I going to do? Ichigo mumbled, looking at the board. Anchor myself to a pole. No, Rukia said, turning a page in her book. I have to go shopping after school. Deep under the reality of the classroom, the submerged city of the inner mindscape was still, steeped in the dim, twilight blue of Ichigo's exhaustion. Shinigami Reishi's roaring river had become a steady, heavy trickle. The glass skyscrapers that leaned sideways were still, their reflections perfectly mirrored in the glassy surface of the water below. Naruto Uzumaki hung from his rusted chains at the bottom of the deepest trench, his head bowed. Even the crippled god of the void was feeling the strain. The soul was being constantly violently thrown out of the physical body and the borders of the inner world were being destroyed. Each time Ichigo left his flesh, the chaotic energies of the sleeping hollow and dormant Quincy blood stirred, threatening to wake up. The meat suit can't take the pressure, Naruto mused, a low, tired hum in his internal voice vibrating in the dark water. He's just a kid, not a battle-hardened shinobi. Each time he draws that huge sword from his chest, his chakra pathways, or whatever they call them here, tear from the inside out. Naruto sunk his awareness far down in his core, into the microscopic singularity of his anti-energy. The immutable present lengthened a little, embracing a cold steadying brace of the edges of Ichigo's fraying soul. He couldn't patch up the physical body, but he could seal the spiritual leaks, making sure the kid didn't accidentally bleed his own life force into the atmosphere. Shopping, huh? Naruto thought, a warm chuckle of amusement bubbling under his pitch-black reishi bandages, sending a flurry of silver bubbles to the surface. Back in my day we just bought more ramen and heavier weights. Let's see what the Shinigami think is a solution to this. The last bell sounded and the students were free from their academic slavery. Ichigo slowly packed his bag. His limbs felt heavy as lead. He ignored Keigo's loud and dramatic invitations to the arcade and managed to escape out the side entrance of the school with Rukia shadowing him perfectly. The setting sun cast long orange shadows across the pavement of Karakura town. Rukia didn't lead him to the busy shopping area or the train station. Instead, she drove through a maze of narrow, winding residential streets, heading deeper into the older, quieter parts of the city away from the modern high-rises. Soon the concrete sidewalks dissolved into cracked asphalt, bordered by tall, weathered stone walls and creeping vines. Exactly where are we going? Ichigo asked, jamming his hands in his pockets. I thought you were broke. You have been stealing my clothes and eating the food of my family for a week. I'm not stealing. I'm requisitioning supplies for an active Shinigami deployment, Rukia corrected haughtily, adjusting the strap of her school bag. And we go to a specialized merchant. A supplier of spiritual goods, dedicated solely to soul reapers stationed in the world of the living. Ichigo frowned, his spiritual awareness expanding naturally as they walked down a particularly narrow alley shadowed by buildings. There's a Shinigami shop in Karakura town. Is it concealed with magic or something? Not magical. Kido, Rukia said. She stopped at the bottom of a gentle slope and pointed to a small, terribly run-down traditional Japanese storefront at the end of the alley. The building looked as if it had survived 100 years of neglect. The sliding doors were wood, weathered gray. Outside, the paper lanterns were faded, written in kanji for Urahara shop. The roof tiles were broken and a tiny dusty display window was filled with the most mundane and useless junk. Broken clocks, rusted tea kettles and unidentifiable wooden trinkets. It did not look like a magical armory, it looked like the front of a dying antique shop. Is this it? Ichigo said, voice thick with disbelief. You sure? Looks like a strong breeze would knock it over. Appearances in the spiritual world are often meant to deceive the mundane eye, Rukia said confidently, smoothing her skirt nervously before stepping off the curb. They came up to the wooden slide doors. Before Ichigo could get his hand out to knock, the door flew open with a loud wooden clack. Welcome. In the doorway was a boy of perhaps 10 years old, his red hair spiky, his face a picture of fierce anger. He held a big straw broom like a baseball bat, bristles pointed right at Ichigo's chest. We don't want your shit to buy. If you're here to buy junk, show me your money first, yelled the kid, aggressively. Ichigo blinked. He was unimpressed. I'm broke. I'm here with her, he pointed at Rukia. A soft, timid voice squeaked from inside the dark shop, Jinta, stop shouting at the customers. A young girl with black hair and pigtails emerged from the shadows, struggling to carry a cardboard box almost as big as she was. We must be polite to the Shinigami, said the manager. Be quiet, Ururu, I'm doing customer service, Jinta barked, not putting down the broom. Before Ichigo could decide whether to flick the kid in the forehead or just turn around and go home, the mood in the alleyway changed violently. It wasn't a sudden fall in temperature, it wasn't the foul rotting copper stench of a hollow. It was pressure. A heavy, stifling, perfectly controlled spiritual pressure came down on the street. It was as if a great, invisible hand had just rested lightly on the top of Ichigo's head, just enough weight to remind him of how easily it could crush him. The reishi was incredibly dense, far exceeding Rukia's original power, but it was hidden behind a carefully constructed, deceptive calm. Down deep in the inner world, the flooded city answered immediately. The water was pale blue and it rippled savagely. Naruto Uzumaki's head shot up at the bottom of the trench as the heavy rusted chains pulled taut against the stone pillar. The crippled god of the void didn't merely feel the pressure, he read the signature within. "Warning," said Naruto's internal voice, no longer a warm tired hum. It was sharp and cold and humming with the ancient instincts forged in decades of lethal shinobi war. Naruto knew this particular type of spiritual energy. It wasn't raw and wild like the hollows. Incredibly sophisticated, calculated and terrifyingly intelligent. It reminded him so much of the first time he had been in the forest of death and felt the suffocating snake like evil of Orochimaru. It had the same sort of lurking, grinning danger as a predator toying with its food, mixed with the aloof, eccentric masking of his old master, Jiraiya. "Careful, Ichigo," Naruto broadcast upwards, enfolding his conceptual anti-energy tightly around the boy's soul, protecting Ichigo from the worst of the psychological pressure. "This dude is not a shop owner. He's a killer in a clown outfit. Keep your hand close to your sword." In the real world, the heavy pressure was gone as suddenly as it had come, snapping back like a released rubber band. Ichigo gasped, stepping back half a pace, his heart thudding against his ribs. The warning from the void had left him on edge, the sudden quiet in his chest. His eyes flicked beyond the two children and into the dark interior of the shop. Now, Ururu. That is how you treat our honored guests." It was a light, merry voice, an irritatingly musical voice. Out of the shadows of the shop a tall, lean man stepped. He was dressed in traditional Japanese wooden geta sandals and loose dark green trousers and a dark green haori coat worn over a simple shirt. His accessories, however, were the most striking. His eyes were lost in shadow. A green and white striped bucket hat was pulled low over his face, and he held a paper fan lazily in front of his mouth. "Welcome to the Urahara shop," said the man, and snapped his fan shut with a sharp clack. He bowed with a grand, sweeping gesture. "I'm Kazuki Urahara, the humble owner and manager. How may I help the beautiful Kuchiki-san and her completely normal human friend today?" Ichigo scowled, his arm hairs standing on end. He couldn't see the man's eyes under the brim of the bucket hat, but he could sense the intensity of the dissecting stare that burned into him. Urahara could see right through the flesh, into the huge, chaotic storm of Shinigami power contained within. "Cut the act, Urahara," Rukia said, her tone brisk and without the respect she usually gave her superiors. She passed Jinta, and entered the dusty shop. "I have no time for your theatrics. I have to buy something." "Oh, business alone." Urahara laughed, a light, breathy sound that didn't reach whatever lay beneath his hat. He motioned to the side, telling Ichigo to follow. Come in. Have some tea? Ururu, get the good cups." Ichigo stepped over the threshold, muscles taut. It was dark inside the shop and smelled of old incense and dried herbs and dust. The walls were lined with shelves, crammed with oddities. Wooden tags with strange kanji, glass bottles filled with glowing liquids, piles of yellowed parchment. Rukia paused in front of the counter. "I don't want tea. I need a gikongen, an artificial soul." Urahara paused, tapping the closed fan against his chin thoughtfully. "A gikongen? Well, that's a controlled item. Soul Society has them under tight control. They are meant to take over a physical body when the Shinigami needs to get out of it for battle. Why would a noble like you need such a thing?" He tilted his head and the shadow of his hat shifted slightly, enough for Ichigo to get a brief, terrifying glimpse of silver-gray eyes. "Unless," Urahara continued, his cheerfulness dropping half an octave, becoming suddenly sharp, "you are no longer the one doing the fighting, Kuchiki-san." Rukia froze, her hands clenching into fists at her side. "My operation is none of your concern, merchant. I have the money. Are you going to sell me this or not?" Urahara looked at her for a long moment, in silence. The air in the shop became thick again, the dust motes suspended in the beams of dying sunlight. Then he laughed again, a loud obnoxious laugh, and opened his fan and waved it lazily. Of course. A customer is a customer. Urahara turned his back to them and walked toward a beaded curtain at the back of the shop. Just a minute while I get the stock. Watch them, Jinta. Don't let the big scary teenager destroy any of my priceless antiques. They're all rubbish, Ichigo, Jinta yelled after him, still pointing the broom at Ichigo. Ichigo folded his arms and looked around the dim room. He's a Shingami, he whispered to Rukia. Rukia corrected softly, her gaze following the beaded curtain. Former. He was expelled from the Soul Society long ago. He opened this shop to supply field agents. He is eccentric, totally unreliable and irritatingly clever. Dangerous, Ichigo muttered as he rubbed the middle of his chest where the silent void was humming a low steady warning. Rukia nodded. He is. A second later, Urahara was back. He didn't have a magical glowing orb or an ancient wooden box. He had a brightly colored, cheaply made cardboard dispenser, like the kind you get at the grocery store checkout lane. The top of the dispenser was a cartoonish pink rabbit head. Well, here we are, Urahara sang out as he dropped the dispenser down on the wooden counter with a loud thud. 1 Gikongan. The Soul Candy brand. Guaranteed to keep your physical body safe, animated, and out of trouble while your soul is busy hacking the local wildlife. Ichigo looked at the pink rabbit head, his eyebrow twitching all over the place. You've got to be kidding me. That looks like a Pez dispenser. Marketing is everything these days, Kurosaki-san. Urahara grinned, sliding the dispenser across the counter to Rukia. Take one of the candies inside and it forcibly ejects the resident soul, replacing it with a temporary, programmed artificial personality. Your body will escape danger, behave perfectly normally around your family, and keep your secret safe. Rukia dug into her blazer and produced a small pouch of old coins, which she tossed onto the counter. I'll take him. Urahara easily caught the pouch. The coins jingled. He did not count them. He just tucked the pouch in his green haori and leaned forward, his elbows on the counter. His bucket hat was slanted up slightly to reveal both of his sharp silver eyes. He looked straight at Ichigo. You are a very loud soul, Kurosaki-san, Urahara said softly, the cheerfulness gone entirely. It roars like a waterfall. It's completely raw, massive and oozing out all over. Ichigo tensed. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. A cold protective anti-energy enfolded his heart, the silent emptiness in his chest swelling as it hid his innermost core instinctively from the merchant's dissecting gaze. Urahara's eyes narrowed a fraction, a trace of real surprise crossing his face before he covered it with another broad, lazy grin. But, Urahara continued, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper meant only for Ichigo's ears. Waterfalls eventually wear through the stone beneath them. Don't drown in your own depths. There are things down at the bottom of the ocean that don't like to be disturbed. Ichigo didn't flinch. He looked back at the eccentric merchant, his brown eyes hard and cold. He didn't know what Urahara saw, but he knew the man was fishing for information. I know how to swim, Ichigo replied. He reached for the pink rabbit dispenser on the counter and snatched it up, turning towards the door. Let's go, Rukia. The place smelled of old dust and bad jokes. Rukia stiffly bowed to Urahara, then turned to follow Ichigo through the sliding wood doors. Alone in the darkness of his shop, Kazuki Urahara pressed his paper fan to his chin. He watched the orange-haired teen walk up the alley until he turned the corner. Manager? Is that guy a soul reaper? Ururu squeaked, poking her head out from behind a stack of boxes. Urahara opened his fan and began to fan himself lightly back and forth. His silver eyes were dark, calculating, and deadly serious. Ururu. He's wearing the robes. Urahara murmured to the empty room. He is brandishing a sword. But when I looked inside of him, I didn't just see a Shinigami. He thumped his finger once on the wooden counter. I saw an abyss. An absolute terrifying emptiness, perfectly wrapped around his heart. It swallowed my spiritual pressure without a ripple. That boy's soul is tied to something, but that something doesn't belong here. And it is very, very conscious. As the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, the streetlights outside flickered on, throwing long, dark shadows over Karakura town. Ichigo walked home, the cheap plastic candy dispenser heavy in his pocket. Ichigo Kurosaki's alarm clock screamed, a harsh electronic screech that vibrated violently against the wood of his desk. Ichigo's awakening wasn't simply that of Ichigo. He pulled his mind up from a deep stifling abyss of exhaustion. He slapped his hand down on the desk, knocking a pile of textbooks to the floor, blindly until he finally found the snooze button. In the bedroom the silence that fell was short, merciful relief. He lay on his back, looking at the ceiling. The morning sunlight came through the gap in the curtains and made the dust motes dancing in the air visible. His body felt as if it had been in some industrial press. His back and shoulders ached with a dull pain, sore from swinging the massive Zanpakuto the day before. "Stand up." The voice was in the closet. It was hard, relentless and utterly unsympathetic to his bodily suffering. Ichigo groaned, dragging his hands down his face. "I'm awake. Wait a minute. I feel like lead in my bones." The closet door slid open. Rukia Kuchiki emerged, already wearing her school uniform, with some kind of odd, boxy device that looked like an oversized, old-fashioned pager. The screen flickered with a faint, red glow. "We haven't got a minute," Rukia said, her dark eyes glued to the screen. "A hollow has appeared. Spirit's signature is weak, but it is moving fast through Sector 4. We have to get in front of it before it gets a target." Ichigo sat up, and the heavy, silent emptiness in his chest gave a low, steady throb in response to her urgency. Any desire he had to fall back onto the mattress and sleep for a week was smothered by the burning instinctual need to make sure no one else got hurt. "Right," Ichigo said, swinging heavy legs out of bed. He grabbed his school uniform and planned to dress before they left. "No time to change into another wardrobe," Rukia cut in, throwing a small plastic thing on his unmade bed. "Use what we bought yesterday, the Gikongan." Ichigo looked down. The cheap brightly colored cardboard dispenser with the cartoonish pink rabbit head sat on the white bedsheet. It looked utterly ridiculous, like a toy designed for a toddler, not a tactical tool for fighting monsters. "You want me to eat strange candies from the creepy dude in the bucket hat right now?" Ichigo picked up the dispenser, asking with a deep scowl. "Water to wash it down. I don't even have that." "It's not candy, it's a highly compressed artificial soul," Rukia corrected, tapping her foot against the floorboards. "Pull the dispenser back. Take the pill. Your soul will be violently ripped out and the artificial personality will assume control of your physical body. It will remain here in your room, quite safe, while you accompany me to slay the hollow. Yes. Now." Ichigo sighed. He didn't trust Urahara Kazuki, and he definitely didn't trust magic items that came in a pink plastic rabbit. But the red light on Rukia's pager was blinking faster. It was imperative to do something. He popped the rabbit's head back on. A small green pill, round, rolled into his palm. There was a faint smell of peppermint and something metallic, like copper wire. He put it in his mouth and swallowed it dry. The chalky pill went down his throat. For 2 seconds there was nothing whatever. And then the world snapped violent. It was the same dizzying, weightless sensation as being hit by Rukia's skull-marked glove, only it was coming from inside his own stomach. An explosive localized shockwave of spiritual pressure exploded in his heart. Ichigo stumbled backwards, gasping for air he didn't need. The bedroom's physical gravity was gone. Suddenly, he was beside his desk, clad in the black robes of a Shinigami, the great weight of his crude Zanpakuto comfortably on his back. He looked dead ahead. His physical body didn't fall to the floor like a severed marionette, but the teenage boy in the gray t-shirt and pajama pants staggered a few steps forward, clutching his stomach, then slowly rose. There was a deep, jarring tremor far below the waking world, far below the flooded city of the inner mindscape. The pale blue Shinigami waters rippled aggressively, slamming against the sides of the sideways glass skyscrapers. Deep in the depths of the darkest trench, Naruto Uzumaki's glowing blue eyes snapped open behind his pitch-black bandages. The crippled god of the void felt the violent ejection of Ichigo's soul, but the feeling that followed was all wrong. The physical vessel, the meat suit, was not empty. It didn't go into its usual dark, dormant state when Ichigo went off to fight. Rather, suddenly a foreign presence was poured into the physical shell. Naruto strained against his rusted chains, his spiritual senses reaching up, assessing the new occupant. It felt tacky. It seemed like it was fresh off the assembly line. For a creature made of the primeval, fundamental concepts of reality, this new soul tasted of artificial flavoring. It did not have the complex, chaotic richness of a human life. It was a concentrated ball of synthetic reishi, with one overriding directive programmed into it. But there was something else below the synthetic programming. Naruto scowled under the dark cloth. This was not some stupid placeholder meant to act dull. There was a vibrating energy, a tight coil of kinetic force, all contained within this artificial soul. It was a spring overcompressed, thrumming with a frantic urge to physical motion. Naruto thought, a low watchful hum in his internal voice. A squatter, and it is heavily armed. The Shinigami who built this thing didn't build a decoy, they made a weapon. Naruto concentrated the micro-singularity of his anti-energy, locking his immutable present firmly onto Ichigo's displaced Shinigami soul. He did not try to remove the artificial being from the physical body, for that would require him to extend his power into the physical plane, and that would shatter the delicate human vessel completely. Watch your back, kid. Naruto broadcast the warm, steady warning up through the chaotic blue waters. The thing that's driving your car right now is not obeying the speed limit. Ichigo stared at his own body in the bedroom. It was a very disturbing, very surreal experience. He saw his own face looking down, his own hands rising to stare at themselves. The physical body clenched its fists, knuckles cracking loudly. Then the body looked up. It grinned. This was all wrong. Ichigo didn't smile much, and when he did it was usually a small, guarded smirk. The expression that was now on his face was large, manic and unhinged. It pulled his cheeks into an unnatural grin. His brown eyes shone with a frantic, unadulterated joy. Oh yes, whispered Ichigo's physical body, the voice all his own, but the inflection all foreign. The body inhaled deeply, the chest expanded. Lungs. Heart. Beat. Muscle fiber. And what a craft, so dense, it's so good. Ichigo's brow lowered into a dark scowl as he clutched the hilt of his Zanpakuto over his shoulder. Hey, quit making my face do that. You look like a psycho. The artificial soul in his body blinked, wild eyes focusing on Ichigo's Shinigami form. You're the proprietor? You have a hell of a build, buddy. See the definition of calf. Then the body went down into a deep perfect squat and shot straight up in the air. It leapt, not jumped. Not just jumped. It cleared 6 feet with ease, the top of Ichigo's orange hair almost brushing the ceiling before it landed silently back on the floorboards. Rukia stared, her eyes wide with utter shock. What's it doing? The typical Gikongan is designed to possess a submissive and shy personality. It's only supposed to run away from danger and hide. You think that looks shy? Ichigo pointed at his body, which was doing one-handed push-ups at terrifying speed on the bedroom floor. Rapid-fire push-ups. Freedom. In a blur of motion the body leapt to its feet. It did not look at Rukia or Ichigo anymore. Its mad eyes turned to the bedroom window. I have legs. I got air. I'm not going in that pill again. Before Ichigo could even command a stop, the body moved. It didn't open the window. It just lowered its shoulder and rammed ahead. The physical body slammed into the glass and the wooden frame with the force of a battering ram. The window blew outwards in a spray of splinters and shards of glass. The body soared into the morning air, completely clearing the roof of the next door clinic, and fell toward the street 2 stories below. Hey! Ichigo yelled, running towards the broken window. He looked down, expecting to see his own physical body shattered on the pavement. Instead, he saw his body land in a perfect 3-point crouch on the asphalt, absorbing the massive impact without breaking a single bone. The artificial soul rose up, gave a loud, echoing whoop of pure joy, and ran down the street with the speed of a speeding car. Within seconds, he had rounded the corner and his body was out of sight. In the bedroom the silence was broken only by the sound of the morning wind blowing through the wrecked window frame. Rukia looked at Ichigo, who slowly turned his head. A heavy, silent emptiness beat in his chest with cold, vibrating fury. He'd been violently thrown off his desire to protect the town from hollows by the need to reclaim his own stolen flesh. You, Ichigo growled, his voice dangerously low. What have you just given me? Rukia was pale, her dark eyes staring at the empty window. She took a little leather-bound notebook from her blazer and thumbed through the pages furiously. I do not understand, stammered Rukia, her usual aristocratic manner completely shattered. It was named soul candy. But that sort of physical enhancement, that overwhelming desire for independence, fits the mold of a mod soul. A what? Ichigo demanded, advancing toward her. A modified soul, Rukia said fast, eyes scanning the text. This was a project that the Soul Society started decades ago. Their aim was to implant artificial souls into deceased human corpses, enhancing their physical characteristics to create superhuman soldiers to fight hollows without risking the lives of Shinigami. They were made with better leg strength, amazing durability and total combat autonomy. Ichigo stared at her, the realization hitting him like a ton of bricks. You're telling me you just put a superhuman military experiment inside my body? The project was a failure. I defended myself, Rukia said, her voice trembling. The ethical consequences of using dead bodies were too heavy. All mod souls were destroyed in the Soul Society. That pill should not exist. Urahara must have snagged it through black market channels and mixed it in with his regular stock. Your ghost world politics mean nothing to me, Ichigo shouted, his spiritual pressure flaring, the wooden floorboards beneath his sandals creaking. My body's running around Karakura town like a total maniac right now. I gotta go to school. I gotta eat, give it back to me. Suddenly Rukia's soul pager beeped loudly from her pocket, a shrill demanding sound. She pulled it out, her eyes widening more. Ichigo, Rukia said, her voice tight with alarm. The hollow. Its signature is spiky. It is targeting a target near the primary school. Ichigo stopped dead. The conflicting needs hit him like two freight trains going in opposite directions. His physical body, his life, his identity, the very vessel he needed to protect his sisters and live in the real world, was currently being hijacked by an autonomous weapon with zero regard for his safety. If that mod soul falls off a bridge or gets hit by a truck, Ichigo'd be a spirit forever. He'd be as good as dead. On the other hand, the heavy, silent void in his chest hummed a deep, agonizing reminder of the crying plus from the construction lot. A monster was in the city. There was a monster in an elementary school. Ichigo bit down on his teeth, his jaw clamped down until his teeth hurt. The need to protect the innocent was absolute and overrode any instinct for self-preservation. Where's the hollow? Ichigo's voice was back to cold, hard focus. Rukia looked at the screen. Sector 4. 3 miles due east. But Ichigo, your body. My body can run, Ichigo cut in, turning back to the shattered window. He gripped the hilt of the huge Zanpakuto tightly. But the people monster is after cannot. We'll start with the hollow. And then we find the guy that sold you that pill. Ichigo bent his knees, driving the roaring, pale blue Shinigami Reishi down into the soles of his woven sandals. He didn't wait to see if Rukia followed. He threw himself from the broken window, and the empty morning air was ground beneath him, and he exploded skyward, rocketing toward the eastern edge of the city. 2 miles away, Ichigo Kurisaki's physical body sprinted across the top of a narrow brick wall. The mod soul was in a state of absolute euphoria. The wind blowing through the orange hair, the burning feeling of oxygen filling the lungs, the incredible dense power of the muscles, it was intoxicating. For years he had been imprisoned in the dark nothingness of a small, compressed pill, waiting for the incinerator. Now he was alive. He jumped from the brick wall, easily leaping 20 feet and landing on the roof of a moving delivery truck. He spread his arms and laughed out loud, unrestrained, that echoed down the busy street. The mod soul looked down at his hands. Amazing, he cheered. This kid's spiritual density has saturated all of his muscle fibers. Testing, I'm faster than I was ever. He jumped off the truck, landed perfectly on the sidewalk and immediately weaved among the morning commuters with impossible agility. The blur of gray pajamas and orange hair swept past people who gasped and fell back. The mod soul didn't mind the stares. He didn't care shit about the consequences. He was only worried about the motion. He'd been given a second chance at life, and he was never, ever going to let the Shinigami put him back into that dark box. He turned a corner, skidding a little on the concrete, and ran down a quiet, tree-lined street that bordered the local elementary school. Suddenly the mod soul skidded violently. He stopped short. His bare feet, with their rubber soles, burned against the pavement of the street. The manic grin on his stolen face faded, replaced by a look of keen, instinctive fear. The mod soul had the artificial, programmed instincts of an anti-hollow weapon, and those instincts were screaming at this moment. The air around the elementary school was heavy, thick with the unmistakable stench of rotting copper and stagnant water. The temperature dropped. From the shadows of the outdoor gymnasium at the school a huge, horrible mass began to form. It was a hollow, easily thrice the size of a normal human being. It was like a gross fat amphibian covered in warts that dripped dark, acidic reishi. 3 jagged holes gaped where its mouth and eyes should have been in its bone-white visage. The hollow roared a wet, deafening roar, and its gaze fell on 3 young children, frozen in absolute terror at the edge of the playground. The children didn't see the monster clearly, but they could feel the despair that emanated from it, a crushing, paralyzing despair. The Mod Soul stared at the beast. He was a product of the Soul Society, designed to fight the enemy, and his programming demanded it. He was born to fight hollows. They were made to fight them and die. But as he looked down at his stolen hands, the warm pulse of the human heart beating in his own chest, a deep, selfish panic seized him. If I battle that thing with this body, the Mod Soul thought he could die. His eyes widened. The Shinigami are coming for me. They'll put me back on the pill. Now I'm free. I just want to be. The hollow lumbered a huge step toward the crying children, its thick arms outstretched to grab them. The Mod Soul took a step back, like he was going to turn and run. He didn't want to be a weapon anymore. All he wanted was to be free. But then, as he turned away from the playground, there was a terrible, concussive boom from the sky above. The Mod Soul raised his head, his stolen brown eyes flying wide in shock. The real owner of the body was descending from the gray clouds like a localized meteor. Ichigo Kurosaki, dressed in the black robes of a Shinigami, was falling toward the earth at a terrifying speed. His massive Zanpakuto unsheathed, held high above his head, his eyes burning with a cold, furious, pale blue light. Ichigo wasn't looking at the body he had stolen. He was looking squarely at the hollow. The teenager didn't think it over. He didn't slow. He roared and swung the massive cleaver with all his might, hoping to destroy the monster utterly before it could even lay a claw on the children. The sky didn't just open, it was violently pushed aside. Ichifugo Kurosaki fell like a localized meteor, propelled by the roaring, highly compressed pale blue reishi trapped beneath his woven sandals. Around his path the heavy overcast clouds swirling above the elementary school broke in a perfect circle. He did not yell. He didn't shout a war cry. He just swung the big, cloth-wrapped hilt of his Zanpakuto back over his shoulder, his brown eyes locked in a terrifying diamond-hard stare at the fat, frog-like hollow threatening the children. The hollow raised its head, its 3 jagged eyeholes widening as it finally felt, through its primal instincts, the huge blinding spike of spiritual pressure plunging towards it. It opened its wide, warty mouth, ready to spray a torrent of acidic reishi to protect itself. It was far too late. Boom! Ichigo slammed into the ground with the impact of an artillery shell. The huge cleaver didn't just cut the hollow. It took off the hollow's entire upper half in a single shattering vertical arc. The wind of the kinetic shockwave of the impact hit the playground like a physical wall. The sand in the sandbox was instantly blown away, scouring the adjacent metal slide. The metal chains of the swings banged loudly, twisting round the top bars. The 3 small children, caught in paralyzing fear, were knocked backwards onto the soft rubber matting of the playground, unhurt but thoroughly dazed. They couldn't see the Shinigami who had just landed before them, nor could they see the massive lower half of the hollow rapidly turning to white ash as it dissolved. But at once they felt the oppressive, suffocating terror pass away, and a sudden, keen rush of fresh air take its place. "Run!" Ichigo yelled without turning his head, the massive flat of his blade sitting heavy on the cracked concrete. "Go home." The children needed no second bidding. Freed of their fear, they jumped to their feet, grabbed their little backpacks and ran toward the chain link fence at the edge of the schoolyard, screaming for their parents. Ichigo waited until the sound of their frantic footfalls had died down the street. The hollow was gone, cleansed by the sheer, massive weight of his blow. Slowly he stood, straight. Measured steady breaths he breathed. He shrugged, feeling aches in spiritual muscles he didn't have. A low steady pulse throbbed in the heavy silent void in his chest, anchoring the leftover adrenaline in his veins. He spun around. His own physical body lay 30 feet away, near the entrance to the school's outdoor gymnasium. It was a shock to the system. He was wearing the gray t-shirt and pajama pants he had slept in. But the pose was wrong. Of course Ichigo slumped, shoulders dropping, weighed down by the world. The body before him was coiled like a spring, shifting its weight from foot to foot with frantic nervous energy. The Mod Soul, the artificial soul, looked up at Ichigo with big, terrified, brown eyes. You. The mod soul stammered as he pointed a shaky finger at the Shinigami. Ichigo's voice, but rising panic. You just one-shot that thing. You're a monster. Ichigo scowled, leaning the huge Zanpakuto on his right shoulder. He stepped forward slowly, then another. Give it to me. No. The mod soul shouted, and stepped back at the same time. He shook his head wildly and clutched at his plundered chest. I won't. Not back into that little dark pill. I was 3 years in a cardboard box waiting to be thrown into an incinerator. I have lungs now, I've got legs, I'm alive. You're a squatter, Ichigo said flatly. His voice was a dangerous low rumble. That is my life. That's me. And you were going to turn your back and let those kids get eaten to save your own skin. The mod soul flinched, the accusation striking a nerve buried deep within his programmed core. He glanced at his stolen hands, and for a moment his manic energy faltered. I didn't want to. I have to fight them. My programming was yelling at me to get involved. But I was so scared. But if this body dies, I die. I just wanted to be alive. Beneath the waking world, deep in the flooded city of the inner mindscape, all was perfectly still. At the bottom of the trench, Naruto Uzumaki hung from his rusted chains, listening to the desperate, frantic pleas filtering down from the physical world. The broken god of the void felt a deep, heavy ache in his chest. Not the chronic pain of his anti-energy, but the familiar tragic sting of empathy. Just a weapon that woke up and found out he didn't want to be shot, Naruto thought, his inner voice resonating through the dark, pale blue waters. Naruto knew all too well what it was like to be used as a tool. He had grown up in a village that saw him only as a vessel for a demon, a military asset to be deployed or destroyed at the whim of old men in council rooms. The Soul Society had created these mod souls, stuffed them into corpses to fight their wars, and when they decided the project was too messy, they simply ordered them all incinerated. Cruel world that makes life just to throw it away when it's no longer useful, Naruto thought, his blue eyes glowing as they narrowed beneath the pitch-black bandages. He raised his heavy, silent consciousness upwards, gripping a warm, steady anchor around Ichigo's rising anger. Easy, kid, Naruto said gently, the conceptual weight of the immutable present smoothing Ichigo's chaotic frustration. He is a coward now. But he is a coward because no one ever taught him to be anything else. He knows only how to survive. Don't break his leg. And you'll have to walk to school in those tomorrow, you know. Ichigo sighed heavily in the schoolyard. He lowered his Zanpakuto until the tip touched the ground. He rubbed the back of his neck, and his own anger shifted, suddenly and inexplicably. The violent urge to tackle the imposter faded, and gave way to a cold, practical exhaustion. Look, said Ichigo, his voice losing its lethal edge. I get it. You don't want to die. But you can't keep that body. I got a family. I have 2 little sisters who are counting on me. You're going to ruin my life if you go running around town acting like a lunatic. And then I'm going to have to spend eternity as a ghost hunting you down. And I tell you I am very obstinate. The mod soul looked at him, weighing the threat against the raw, blinding power he had just seen. He swallowed. What if I give it back? What happens to me? Asked the mod soul, voice trembling. Do you break the pill? You give me back to the Shinigami in the closet so she can destroy me? Ichigo's frown turned into a scowl, and the weighty emptiness in his chest hummed a quiet demanding rhythm. He hadn't thought that far. He just wanted to stop sleeping on the street. Ichigo said firmly. I won't let her destroy you. This was not a negotiation calculated. This was a promise. We'll think of something. Just spit out the pill. The mod soul hesitated for a moment. He stared up at the massive Shinigami, looking for a lie in the boy's brown eyes. He found nothing but sheer, obstinate belief. The mod soul reached up slowly, fingers brushing the edge of his stolen jaw, getting ready to shove the artificial soul pill back up the esophagus. Then violently the concrete beneath their feet trembled. The air pressure in the schoolyard fell, then turned upside down. From the shadowed canopy of the outdoor gymnasium there was a sickening wet tearing noise. Ichigo turned his head around and his eyes opened wide. Hollow, the bloated amphibian, hadn't been working entirely alone. The massive, throbbing sack of acidic reishi clung to the dark rafters of the gymnasium roof, a perfect camouflage against the rusted metal. It was a relic, a parasitic spawn left behind like a swollen tick by the primary hollow. The main hollow died and the sac burst violently. It didn't drop a hollow. It dropped a concentrated, very unstable bomb of boiling, yellowish acid straight on the ground. Beneath it was a little girl, frozen with terror, who had become separated from the others in the panic. She had tripped on her shoelaces and was sitting on the concrete, staring up at the falling mass of lethal spiritual energy. Ichigo's muscles tightened. He raised his huge Zanpakuto, his reishi exploding blindingly bright. But the distance was too far. The heavy blade was tugging. He couldn't gather the energy under his feet fast enough to cover the 50 feet in the fraction of a second he had. He was going to be late. Crack. The air was shattered by the cracking of concrete under great physical pressure. Ichigo's body moved. The mod soul wasn't using pale blue reishi. He called upon the raw, hyper-compressed muscle power of his artificial programming. He sprang forward, the rubber soles of his bare feet leaving scorch marks on the pavement. He cleared the 50-foot gap in a blur of gray fabric and orange hair, faster than any normal human could ever hope to be. The acid bomb hit and the little girl screamed. The mod soul didn't attempt to take her. There was no time to get her out of the blast radius. Instead he flung his stolen body right over her, using his wide back as a physical shield. Simultaneously he raised his right leg in a perfectly executed, frighteningly powerful high kick. His bare heel clipped the falling sack of acid. The physical force of the new kick was comparable to a baseball bat smashing a water balloon. The sack violently redirected, arcing off the girl in a diagonal flight to explode against the far brick wall of the gymnasium. There was a loud hiss as the explosion hit, the acid eating through the brick and mortar in an instant and filling the air with acrid, choking white smoke. But it wasn't a clean tip. The sack splattered against his heel, a spray of the boiling, yellowish acid falling down. It struck the mod soul in the right calf, burning through the pajama pants in an instant and searing the flesh underneath. Gah! Screamed the mod soul, a sound of pure, agonizing physical pain. He fell onto the concrete, holding his right leg, curling up next to the terrified little girl. A second later, Ichigo followed, his Zanpakuto raised, ready to obliterate any remaining threats. He looked through the smoke, his spiritual awareness sweeping the schoolyard. Nothing. The rest were totally destroyed. He dropped the enormous sword right away. It rang loudly on the concrete, and he sank to his knees by his own physical body. Hey! Ichigo grabbed the mod soul by the shoulder and rolled him over onto his back. Hey! Look at me. The mod soul's face, Ichigo's face. White, slick with a sheen of cold sweat. His breathing was short and rapid, eyes closed tightly against the pain that shot up from his leg. The flesh on the calf was blistered and red, but the great spiritual density of Ichigo's natural body had prevented the acid from eating through to the bone. I broke your leg, the mod soul choked, his voice tight with pain. My apologies. I didn't mean to break it. Ichigo looked at the artificial soul in his face. He recalled the cowardice of 5 minutes ago. He remembered the selfish, desperate plea to get away. Then he looked at the little girl, perfectly uninjured, crying quietly as she scrabbled backwards towards the safety of the fence. You didn't run, Ichigo said softly, no anger in his voice. The mod soul opened one eye and looked up at the Shinigami. My programming. It made me want to protect her. I'm just a weapon. I couldn't keep it in. Bullshit, Ichigo said, matter-of-factly. He reached down, grabbed the mod soul's uninjured shoulder, and held on tight. Within Ichigo's chest, a heavy, silent void beat with a warm, steady pulse, acknowledging the universal truth of the battlefield. Programming makes you struggle. It doesn't make you go throw yourself over a kid to take a hit. Ichigo's brown eyes met his own stolen gaze. You were scared shitless. You wanted to run, but when it counted, you came through. You are not just a pill in a box. The mod soul stared at him, the panic and pain momentarily lost in a deep, stuttering shock. All his short artificial life he had been told that he was a mistake, a dangerous tool that had to be disposed of. No one had ever accused him of having a heart. Footsteps pounded across the concrete. Rukia Kuchiki ran out into the schoolyard, her school blazer billowing behind her. She stopped, breathing hard, her dark eyes taking in the scene. The huge acid burn on the gymnasium wall, the frightened little girl running away, and Ichigo in his Shinigami robes kneeling over his own wounded physical body. Rukia immediately reached into her pocket and produced a small glowing red keto tag. Her face was a mask of clean, professional execution. "Get out of the way, Ichigo," Rukia said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "The mod soul is not very stable. It has damaged your ship. I'll get it out and destroy the pill before it can escape again." She advanced, the red tag held high, ready to bring it down on the mod soul's forehead and burn the artificial soul to ash, to blast it out. The mod soul squeezed his eyes shut, his body going stiff as a board. He didn't fight. He didn't attempt to run on his burned leg. He accepted his lot, the brief, bright flare of life ending violently and suddenly. Suddenly, a huge, calloused hand shot out and grabbed Rukia's wrist with an iron grip, stopping the tag inches from the physical body's face. Rukia gasped, her eyes popping open in shock. Ichigo had gotten up. He hadn't just blocked her, he was glaring at her with a look of absolute, terrifying defiance. The sheer dense weight of his spiritual pressure flared, the air in the schoolyard felt instantly heavy and suffocating. "We aren't destroying him," I said. Ichigo growled and Rukia took an instinctive half-step back at the cold, implacable power in his voice. "Ichigo, you don't understand the danger," Rukia began, struggling against his grip. "I know he just took a blast of acid to save a kid while you were still running down the street." Ichigo cut in sharply, releasing her wrist. He walked with purpose and put himself between his broken physical body and Rukia, a solid wall of black robes and great steel. "He's not a weapon. And he is no mistake," Ichigo said, his tone brooking no argument. "He's staying with us." Rukia eyed him, rubbed her wrist where his spiritual fingers had bruised her synthetic skin. Her eyes flicked from the fierce, protective scowl on Ichigo's face to the mod soul, who was looking up at the Shinigami with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. She exhaled slowly and lowered the red keto tag. The rigid, inflexible laws of the Soul Society demanded the destruction of the anomaly. But when she looked at the boy who had stolen her powers, she knew that he was completely incapable of following rules that conflicted with his need to protect. "Kurosaki, you will regret this," Rukia warned softly, but the deadly tone had gone from her voice. "An artificial soul needs a vessel to stay alive. If he's not in your body, where do you suggest he resides? I'm not sharing my closet." Ichigo frowned in practical confusion, the anger evaporating. He looked around the empty schoolyard, then down at the wounded mod soul. "We'll work it out," Ichigo muttered, reaching down to lift his physical body up by the armpits. "But first we have to get him out of me. My leg's on fire and I need to tell Yuzu why half my pajamas are melted." The smell was horrible. It was a suffocating blend of molten polyester, burnt hair and the acrid chemical smell of boiling acid that hung in the concrete of the schoolyard. Ichigo Kurosaki stood over his own physical body while he still occupied his ethereal Shinigami form. He looked down at the ruined right leg of his pajamas. The fabric was gone from the knee down, and on his calf was a jagged, angry patch of blistered red skin. The wound was ugly, weeping a thin, clear fluid, but the sheer natural density of his underlying physical reishi had kept the acid from burning straight through to the muscle and bone. The mod soul sat on the concrete, filling that damaged flesh, clutching the burned leg, chest rising and falling with short, panicked breath. He looked up at Ichigo, the raw terror of what was about to happen battling against the pain of his physical agony. "I'm ready," Rukia Kuchiki said, stepping forward. Her voice was all business, the shock of a few minutes ago wiped clean. She held out the pale hand, the cartoonish pink rabbit dispenser in her palm. "Wait," the mod soul gasped, voice cracking. He looked wildly between Ichigo's huge intimidating form and Rukia's cold appraising eyes. You promised. You said you wouldn't let her destroy me." "I did," Ichigo said, his brown eyes steady, his voice soft. Rukia looked over at him. "Pop him out. It's just the pill. No burners, no keto tags." Rukia hesitated for a fraction of a second, clenching her jaw. As a Shinigami she was duty-bound to eliminate the rogue anomaly. But the weighty presence of Ichigo's spiritual pressure was very much an immediate deterrent. She let out a tiny, annoyed exhale, resigned to the sheer stubbornness of her temporary replacement. "Open your mouth," Rukia ordered the mod soul, her voice clipped. The mod soul gulped. His stolen face was white, streaming with cold sweat. He shoved his head back, forcing Ichigo's mouth open. Rukia pressed the pink plastic dispenser against the boy's chin and squeezed hard on the back of the rabbit's head. Pop! A small green spherical pill shot from the dispenser and landed at the back of the throat. The mod soul reflexively gagged and swallowed the hard, chalky sphere. The change was instantaneous. A sharp kinetic shockwave rippled through the air, invisible to the mundane world but loud as a gunshot to spiritual ears. Then the mod soul was violently ejected from the physical body. The green pill shot back up Ichigo's throat, out of his mouth, and hit the concrete with a loud clang, rolling a few inches before stopping next to the melted puddle of acid. Without a soul to pilot it, Ichigo's body went limp instantly. It fell backward, head tilted to one side, dead to the world. "He's out," Rukia said, bending to pick up the green pill. She pinched it between her thumb and forefinger, disgusted and with terrible foreboding, at the little, squashed artificial soul. "And now you gotta go. The longer you leave such a serious wound unfilled in your physical body, the greater the chance that your mortal shell will go into systemic shock." Ichigo did not protest. He looked at the massive, cumbersome Zanpakuto before him, the roaring furnace of his pale blue power running through his ethereal veins. He had to cram all that raging force into a fragile, bleeding vessel. He stepped up and stood directly over his unconscious physical body. He didn't need the glove marked with skulls to come back. He just loosened his grip on the spiritual and allowed the natural magnetic pull of his own flesh to take over. He shut his eyes and let himself fall back. Far below the waking world, the flooded city of the inner mindscape braced for impact. In the bottom of the deepest trench, Naruto Uzumaki raised his head, eyes glowing blue, narrowing under bandages as black as pitch. "Here it comes," the crippled god of the void thought, his spiritual muscles straining against the heavy, rusted chains. Ichigo's soul plopped back into his physical body in a none too smooth transition. It was like trying to force the raging river back into a garden hose. Violent pale blue Shinigami water crashed down from the bruised sky, smashing into the sideways glass skyscrapers, sending massive chaotic shockwaves into the ocean floor. But this time there was a new, terrifying element. The pain of the acid burn registered as Ichigo's mind caught up with his body nervous system. A jagged spike of pure unadulterated agony ripped through the flooded city. Instantly the water temperature shot up, boiling around the edges of the trench. The physical trauma pulsed down, a dark corrosive red current threatening to stain the pale blue reishi. Naruto gritted his teeth, a low grunt escaping his lips as the heat enveloped him, bound as he was. The acid from the hollow was not just physical. It left a spiritual toxicity meant to rot a soul from the outside in. If that residue was allowed to flow freely through Ichigo's mindscape, it would poison his Riryoku, greatly impeding his ability to heal. Naruto ordered the void. "Not on my watch." He concentrated on the microscopic singularity hidden deep in his chest. He didn't take away the pain. Ichigo needed the pain, the physical feedback to know his limits, to respect his own mortality. Naruto could dispel the poison, but the fascistic power of the immutable present was exploded. Naruto sent up a huge, heavy blanket of absolute nothingness to meet the corrosive, dark red current. The moment the hollow's poisonous residue hit Naruto's anti-energy, it was nullified. It dissolved into harmless, gray silt that lazily fell to the ocean floor. "Breathe, kid," Naruto's warm, steady voice sent straight to the core of Ichigo's soul, anchoring the boy in place against the rising tide of pain. "It's just fire. Static only. Put it in a box and lock it. You're still alive. You are still standing. Let the pain remind you you're alive." Naruto hung his head, panting hard, dark reishi blood oozing slightly from beneath his bandages. Holding the line had been hard work, but at least the boiling waters of the inner world were beginning to cool slowly. He knew he had held the line. Ichigo Kurisaki's physical eyes flew open in the schoolyard. He didn't scream, but his throat made a jagged, harsh gasp. His back arched off the concrete and every muscle in his body locked rigid as the fiery, biting agony of the acid burn fully integrated into his nervous system. It was as if someone had put a red-hot iron right up against his right calf and left it there to sizzle. "Breathe, Ichigo," Rukia said calmly, kneeling beside him. "The integration's complete. Your spiritual pressure is already beginning to close the broken capillaries, but the nerve damage is severe." Ichigo snapped his jaw shut, teeth grating together with a sound like a squeak. He rolled onto his side, hugging his right knee and pulling the burned leg to his chest. His gray t-shirt immediately became wet with a cold, clammy sweat. He opened his eyes. He saw cracked and blurred concrete inches from his face. Pain was blinding, but under the roaring fire in his leg he could hear the heavy, silent void in his chest humming a slow, rhythmic lullaby. It was an anchor, steadying his racing heart, drawing the panic from his mind, leaving cold, manageable endurance. He exhaled a long, trembling breath, loosening his tense muscles, little by little. I'm fine, Ichigo rasped, voice hoarse and raw. He managed to work himself up into a sitting position, his arms shivering under his own weight. He looked down at his ruined pajama pants and the blistered, angry red flesh, and his stomach turned a little. "You're a long way from good." Rukia stood and brushed the dust off her skirt, and she gripped the green pill in her left hand. "But you are alive. And your physical vessel is in safety. Now we have to face the remaining complication." She held up her hand, displaying the small, compact mod soul. "You told me not to destroy it," Rukia said, her dark eyes very serious. "But as I said, an artificial soul requires a physical anchor to maintain coherence in the world of the living. If it's in pill form and not in a sterile environment for more than a few days, its reishi will just evaporate. It'll die." Ichigo winced as he shifted his weight, trying to take the pressure off his calf. "So put it in something. During the war you said they used dead bodies. Does it have to be human?" "No," Rukia said slowly, her brow furrowing in thought. "Mod soul programming is very flexible. It can synchronize with any physical object that has a basic anatomical structure, a head, a torso, limbs. The more complex the structure, the better the synchronization." She looked around the ruined schoolyard. The explosion had spread debris all over. Her gaze skimmed along the chain-link fence that lined the street, stopping on a pile of cast-offs next to a municipal trash can overflowing with garbage. "Wait here," Rukia commanded, walking across the courtyard. Ichigo exhaled with a harsh, sarcastic laugh. "Sure, yeah. Then I'll do a marathon while you're gone." He watched her as she walked towards the bin. She crouched down, rummaging through the discarded cardboard boxes and crumpled newspapers, not mindful of her own immaculate appearance. A moment later she was up, holding something by the scruff of its neck. Turning back around, she walked back towards Ichigo with a small triumphant smirk on her lips. "This will be enough," Rukia declared, presenting the item for him to examine. Ichigo stared at it, his right eye twitching madly. It was a lion full of stuff. But lion was a generous term. It looked like it had been made in a factory that had never seen a real animal. Its head was far too large, with a weird spiky mane of cheap, stiff yellow felt. Its body was a dull, faded orange. Its arms and legs were short and chubby and not threatening at all. And to add insult to injury, the plushie was filthy. It smelled of mildew, of rainwater that was stale, of old dirt. One of its black, plastic button eyes was missing, replaced by a ragged tear revealing the white cotton stuffing underneath. It had a little ragged red bow tie sewn crookedly to its neck. "You're putting a superhuman military weapon, a highly trained one, inside a piece of trash?" Ichigo asked, his voice completely flat. "It has 4 limbs and a head," Rukia said, practically not caring how ridiculous it sounded. "It is the only viable vessel in the vicinity. Frankly, it's more than the rogue anomaly deserves." Rukia acted before Ichigo could even think of a response. She saw a small unstitched tear in the fabric near the lion's mouth. She pinched the green pill between her fingers and shoved the mod soul unceremoniously deep into the cotton stuffing of the plushie's head. The ratty stuffed lion just dangled in Rukia's hand for 2 seconds, limp and lifeless. Then the cotton body gave a violent shudder. The only remaining black button eye appeared to focus, catching the dull afternoon light. The orange stubby arms gripped Rukia's wrist suddenly, jerking up with surprising strength. "What the hell is this?" The voice that erupted from the plushie was high-pitched, incredibly loud, and vibrating with pure unadulterated outrage. It didn't sound like Ichigo anymore, it sounded like a frantic, aggressive cartoon character. The stuffed lion kicked wildly in Rukia's grip, its little legs flailing in the air. "I was a perfect specimen of physical perfection 5 minutes ago," the lion squealed, spinning its big head round and gazing at its own stubby felt paws. "I had a 6-pack. I had definition in my calves. Now I'm orange. And I smell like a garbage can." What sick, twisted joke is this? With a completely deadpan expression, Rukia stared at the waving plushie. She held it at arm's length, away from her face. Sync complete. Unfortunately, the vocal cords appear to be in fine working order. Put me back. The lion shouted, pointing a stubby finger straight at Ichigo. Put me back into the team. I rescued a kid. I had an acid blast for you people. I want a ship with working knees. Ignoring the burning agony in his leg, Ichigo forced himself up and snatched the plushie from Rukia's hand. He seized the screaming lion by its silly yellow mane and pulled it close to his face. His brown eyes were dark, his jaw a hard, unyielding line. The heavy, silent void in his chest hummed with a cold, heavy weight to his immediate presence. Listen to me. Ichigo growled, voice dropping an octave, easily drowning out the lion's frantic shrieking. The plushie went silent immediately, the single black button eye staring wide in terror at the boy who had just cleaved a massive monster in half. You wanted to live. Ichigo's words were careful and absolute. You're alive. You inhale. You're not in a dark box waiting for an incinerator. You've got a body. It's ugly, it stinks, and it doesn't have a six-pack, but it's yours. The lion swallowed hard, a little cloth bump bobbing up and down his throat. One more time you complain, Ichigo said, lowering the plushie a little, and I'll put you right back in that municipal trash can and let the garbage truck take you to the landfill. We understand each other? The lion nodded violently, its great head bobbing up and down. Yes, sir. Like a bell. Sweet new body. My color is so orange. Very breathable fabric. Good. Ichigo muttered as he dropped the lion onto the cement. The plushie landed on its feet, brushing its grimy paws. It looked incredibly sullen, but smart enough to keep its mouth shut. Ichigo sighed long and tired, running a hand through his hair. His eyes dropped to the mangled leg. The crisis was over, but the dull reality of his situation was closing in on him. He had to walk home. He had to hide the serious chemical burn from his father, a real doctor. And why the hell he was dragging this disgusting stuffed animal around? We have to name him, Ichigo said, leaning heavily on his uninjured left leg. I won't have to call him Mod Soul. Just to yell at him. Rukia crossed her arms, looking down at the flattened lion. He's a Konpaku of the Kaizo. A modified soul by technical designation. Ichigo frowned, chewing at the syllables. Kaizo Konpaku. Too long. What about Kaizo? The lion puffed out his little chest at once. The button eye gleamed. Kaizo. Yes. That sounds like a tough one. Sounds like the name of a warrior. I agree. Ichigo instantly decided, completely ignoring the plushie's excitement. No, you can't look like a chew toy and sound like a tough guy. I'll take the latter half. Konpaku. Your name is Kon. The lion stopped, stubbly arms dropping to its sides. Kon? That sounds like a sniz. Sounds like a condiment. You can't call me Kon. I just did, Ichigo said flatly. He bent down and seized Kon by the scruff of his neck, and thrust the screaming plushie headfirst into his canvas school bag Rukia had retrieved from the sidelines. Kon's frantic protests of, I demand a recount, were muffled as he zipped the bag closed. I want Kaizo. Ichigo threw the bag over his shoulder, the heavy canvas thudding against his hip. He stepped warily forward with his right leg. As soon as his foot touched the ground, a white-hot spike of pain shot up his calf and he sucked his breath through his teeth. His knee buckled and he fell. Then a hand grabbed his left arm and yanked his arm across a small, stout shoulder before he could hit the concrete. Ichigo looked down, in shock. Rukia Kuchiki stood beside him, supporting a good deal of his weight. She didn't look at him. She stared ahead, the usual aristocratic mask of indifference on her face. She gave him no soft words of comfort, no apologies for the pain the battle had done him. Don't put your whole huge body on me, Rukia ordered brusquely, readjusting her grip on his waist to stabilize his center of gravity. Clumsy teenagers aren't built to carry my synthetic spine. Ichigo stared at the side of her face for a long second. The heavy emptiness in his chest throbbed slowly and resonantly, registering the quiet shift in the air. They weren't friends. It was an odd, unnatural partnership, one of pure need and stolen power. But the burning irritation he normally felt towards her was softened just a fraction as he felt the solid, practical support she was giving him. He knew what that gesture was. A shared acknowledgement of what this war was doing to both of them. "I'm not a klutz," Ichigo muttered, his voice without any real heat. He shifted his weight, trying to take as much weight off her as possible while still using her for balance. "Just don't put me in a puddle." "I don't promise anything," Rukia said smoothly, taking the first step forward. Exhausted Shinigami and powerless Soul Reaper together began the long, agonizingly slow limp back through the quiet streets of Karakura town. The muffled complaints of a stuffed lion echoed softly from the canvas bag swinging between them. Stay tuned for more. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. I'm thrilled you watched the video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe for even more exciting content coming your way soon.